The genesis of the Lamenters chapter traces back to one of the most controversial periods in imperial history, the 21st founding, known throughout the Imperium as the Cursed Founding. In the 36th millennium, the Adeptus Mechanicus and the High Lords of Terra embarked on an ambitious project to create new Space Marine chapters using experimental genetic modifications and untested gene seed manipulation techniques. The Lamenters emerged from this tumultuous period as one of several chapters derived from the noble lineage of Sanguinius, the angelic primarch of the Blood Angels. Unlike the traditional foundings that preceded it, the 21st founding represented a departure from established protocols. The tech priests of Mars, driven by their endless quest for knowledge and improvement, believed they could eliminate the genetic flaws that plagued certain Astartes bloodlines. The Blood Angels' gene seed, despite producing some of the finest warriors in the Emperor's service, carried within it the twin curses of the Black Rage and the Red Thirst, psychological and physiological aberrations that had haunted the sons of Sanguinius since the Horus Heresy. The Lamenters were conceived as a potential solution to these hereditary afflictions. Their gene seed underwent extensive modification and purification processes within the sacred laboratories of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The tech priests employed arcane biotechnology and genetic manipulation techniques that pushed the boundaries of their understanding. These procedures involved complex viral therapy, genetic splicing, and the introduction of stabilizing elements designed to suppress the violent tendencies inherent in Sanguinian gene stock. Initial assessments of the newly created Lamenters' gene seed appeared promising. Early generations of Battle Brothers showed markedly reduced instances of the Black Rage, the berserker fury that could overcome Blood Angels' descendants during combat. The Red Thirst, that vampiric craving for blood that gnawed at the souls of Sanguinius's progeny, also seemed diminished in the chapter's founding members. These encouraging results led the overseeing Magos Biologists to declare the project a qualified success, though they maintained careful monitoring protocols for the nascent chapter. The chapter's first recruits were drawn from a few death worlds located in the segmentum solar. The surfaces of these planets were scarred by constant seismic activity, toxic storms, and predatory fauna that had evolved to survive in unforgiving environments. The human population lived in underground settlements, constantly fighting for survival against both the planet's natural hazards and the mutant creatures that emerged from the toxic wastelands. These conditions produced recruits with exceptional endurance, tactical flexibility, and an innate understanding of hardship that would serve them well as Astartes. The recruitment process followed traditional Blood Angels protocols, with aspirants undergoing the ritual trials that had been practiced since the Great Crusade. Young candidates faced tests of courage, endurance, and mental fortitude before being deemed worthy of receiving the gene seed. The chapter's sanguinary priests, specially trained in the modified implantation procedures developed for the Lamenters, oversaw each transformation with meticulous care. These medical specialists monitored every stage of the process, documenting any deviations from expected outcomes and adjusting their techniques accordingly. During the chapter's formative years, their organization adhered strictly to the guidelines established in the Codex Astartes. The Lamenters maintained the standard 10 companies, each with its designated role within the chapter's structure. The first company consisted of veteran Terminators, while the second through fifth companies served as battle companies equipped for independent operations. The sixth through ninth companies functioned as reserve formations, providing tactical, assault, and devastator specialists as needed. The 10th company handled scout operations and the training of new recruits. The chapter's heraldry during this early period reflected their origins and aspirations. Their original color scheme featured a distinctive checkerboard pattern of yellow and black, arranged in precise geometric squares across their power armor. This design choice was both practical and symbolic. The bright yellow provided excellent visibility on the battlefield, while the black squares created a disruptive pattern that could confuse enemy targeting systems. The checkerboard motif also represented the chapter's dual nature, the light squares symbolizing their hope to overcome the darkness of their genetic heritage, while the dark squares acknowledged the shadow that would always follow the sons of Sanguinius. Chapter badges during this period incorporated elements that honored their blood angel's lineage while establishing their unique identity. The winged blood drop, traditional symbol of Sanguinius's legacy, appeared prominently on shoulder guards and banners. However, the Lamenters modified this iconography by adding subtle variations. The wings were often depicted in a more protective, embracing posture rather than the aggressive spread typically associated with blood angels' heraldry. These early symbols reflected the chapter's desire to embody the more noble aspects of their Primarch's character, while distancing themselves from the violent impulses that plagued their gene line. Despite the initial optimism surrounding their creation, the genetic modifications proved insufficient to completely eliminate the Blood Angel's hereditary curses. The first manifestations of the Black Rage among the Lamenters occurred during their third decade of service, when several battle brothers succumbed to the Berserker fury during a campaign against Orc raiders in the Maelstrom's outer reaches. These warriors, previously model examples of Astartes' discipline and tactical acumen, suddenly erupted into uncontrolled violence, seeing enemies from the Horus heresy superimposed over their actual foes. The chapter's sanguinary priests responded to these incidents with intensive research and modified treatment protocols. They developed specialized meditation techniques designed to strengthen mental barriers against the rage, implemented enhanced psychological screening procedures for recruits, and created new pharmacological interventions. These efforts showed mixed results. Some battle brothers benefited significantly from the treatments, while others continued to struggle with the genetic legacy of their Primarch's death. The Red Thirst proved equally persistent, though it manifested differently among the Lamenters than in other Blood Angel's successors. Rather than the overwhelming compulsion for blood that characterized the condition in other chapters, Lamenters afflicted with the thirst experienced a more subtle but equally dangerous craving. They became obsessed with the concept of sacrifice, driving themselves to increasingly reckless acts of heroism and self-endangerment. This manifestation aligned disturbingly well with what would later become the chapter's defining characteristic, their seemingly cursed fate. As decades passed, the chapter's heraldry began to evolve in response to their experiences and the gradual understanding of their true nature. The rigid checkerboard pattern gave way to more organic designs that reflected the blood-soaked reality of their service. Yellow remained the dominant color, but the black squares transformed into more fluid shapes that resembled tears or drops of blood. This transition occurred gradually, with individual companies and squads adopting variations of the new design before it became standardized across the chapter. The most significant heraldic change came with the adoption of the bleeding heart as the chapter's primary symbol. This icon emerged organically from the ranks, first appearing as personal heraldry among battle brothers who had lost close comrades in particularly brutal engagements. The bleeding heart represented both the chapter's compassion for humanity and their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others, even when such sacrifice seemed futile or cursed. The symbol incorporated elements of traditional Sanguinian iconography. The heart shape echoed the blood drop of their parent chapter, while the flowing blood represented both their genetic heritage and their acceptance of suffering as their burden. The chapter's librarians played a crucial role in documenting and understanding these genetic manifestations. They maintained detailed records of each incident, tracking patterns and potential triggers that might precipitate episodes of the Black Rage or Red Thirst. Their research revealed that the modified gene seed had not eliminated these conditions, but had instead altered their expression in subtle ways. The Black Rage episodes were less frequent but more intense when they occurred, while the Red Thirst had evolved into something more psychologically complex than simple bloodlust. Training regimens within the chapter adapted to accommodate these genetic realities. Combat doctrines emphasized squad cohesion and mutual support, recognizing that battle brothers might need to restrain or redirect comrades experiencing genetic episodes. Chaplains developed new litanies and rituals designed to strengthen mental discipline and provide spiritual anchors against the rage. The Lamenters' approach to managing their genetic legacy differed significantly from their parent chapter and other Blood Angel successors. Rather than forming death companies to channel the Black Rage into useful military purpose, the Lamenters focused on prevention and treatment. They viewed each battle brother lost to the Rage as a failure of their duty to preserve the Emperor's gift of genetic enhancement. This philosophical stance would prove both a strength and a weakness in the trials that lay ahead for the chapter. The events that would define the Lamenters' tragic destiny began in the early years of the 41st millennium, when the Imperium found itself stretched thin across countless fronts. The Maelstrom, that massive warp storm scarring the galaxy's eastern fringe, had become a breeding ground for chaos cults, renegade space marines, and Xenos raiders who exploited the region's unstable nature. Into this volatile theater, the High Lords of Terra deployed several space marine chapters to establish order and protect the vital shipping lanes that connected the Segmentum's scattered worlds. Among these deployments was the assignment of the Lamenters to the Maelstrom Warders, an organization of loyalist chapters tasked with containing the threats emerging from the warp storm's influence. The Warders operated under the leadership of Luft Huron, chapter master of the Astral Claws, whose aggressive tactics and charismatic leadership had earned him considerable respect among his brother Astartes. The Lamenters, still relatively young as a chapter and eager to prove their worth despite their genetic struggles, welcomed the opportunity to serve alongside such distinguished warriors. Huron's initial campaigns impressed the Lamenters' leadership. The Astral Claws Master demonstrated tactical brilliance in coordinating multi-chapter operations against chaos incursions, and his willingness to take decisive action where imperial bureaucracy might hesitate resonated with warriors who had grown frustrated with the Administratum's often sluggish response to emerging threats. Captain Malachim Foros, who would later rise to become the Lamenters' chapter master, particularly admired Huron's direct approach to warfare and his apparent dedication to protecting imperial citizens. The Badab system itself became the focal point of the Warders' operations. Huron had established his power base on Badab Primaris, transforming the world into a fortress that could coordinate military responses across the entire sector. The planet's strategic location made it an ideal staging ground for operations against chaos forces, and its industrial capacity provided the Warders with the resources necessary to maintain extended campaigns. The Lamenters established a significant presence on Badab Primaris, with several companies rotating through the system as part of their ongoing deployment. During these early years, the cooperation between the Astral Claws and Lamenters developed into genuine brotherhood. Joint training exercises became common, with both chapters sharing tactical knowledge and combat techniques. The Lamenters' expertise in siege warfare complemented the Astral Claws' more aggressive assault doctrines. This military partnership gradually evolved into deeper bonds of loyalty and mutual respect that would prove crucial in the conflicts to come. The first signs of trouble emerged gradually, manifesting as bureaucratic disputes rather than open rebellion. Huron began expressing increasing frustration with the Administratum's handling of the Maelstrom region, particularly their tendency to redirect resources away from the Warders just when major operations were reaching critical phases. The Astral Claws Master argued that the High Lords of Terra failed to understand the unique challenges posed by the Maelstrom's chaotic influence, and that local commanders needed greater autonomy to respond effectively to emerging threats. These concerns initially seemed reasonable to the Lamenters' leadership. They had witnessed firsthand how imperial bureaucracy could hamper military effectiveness, and they shared Huron's frustration with supply shortages and delayed reinforcements. When Huron began implementing new policies to streamline resource allocation and improve coordination between warder chapters, the Lamenters supported these initiatives as necessary military reforms rather than acts of defiance against imperial authority. The transformation from reform to rebellion occurred incrementally, making it difficult for the Lamenters to recognize the dangerous path they were following. Huron's rhetoric gradually shifted from criticism of imperial inefficiency to questioning the authority of distant administrators who had never faced the horrors emerging from the Maelstrom. He began arguing that the Warders understood the region's needs better than Terra-based officials, and that they had both the right and responsibility to act independently when imperial command structures failed to provide adequate support. The Lamenters found themselves increasingly isolated from other imperial forces as Huron's policies became more aggressive. The Astral Claws began intercepting imperial tithe ships, claiming the resources were needed for immediate military operations against chaos threats. While Huron presented these actions as temporary measures necessitated by bureaucratic failures, they constituted clear violations of imperial law. The Lamenters' participation in these operations, initially reluctant and limited, gradually increased as they became more deeply embedded in Huron's command structure. The point of no return came when the Administratum formally accused Huron of rebellion and demanded his immediate surrender. The Astral Claw's master's response was swift and decisive. He declared the Maelstrom Warders independent of Terra's authority, claiming that they would continue to protect the region's inhabitants regardless of political interference from distant bureaucrats. This declaration forced every chapter serving under Huron to choose between loyalty to the Imperium and loyalty to their immediate commander and battle brothers. For the Lamenters, this decision proved agonizing. Their genetic heritage as sons of Sanguinius instilled deep loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium, but their bonds with the Astral Claws had been forged through shared blood and sacrifice. Captain Foros and the chapter's senior leadership spent days in heated debate, weighing their oaths to Terra against their obligations to warriors who had fought beside them for decades. The decision ultimately came down to their assessment of Huron's character and motivations. They believed he genuinely sought to protect imperial citizens, and that his rebellion stemmed from noble intentions rather than personal ambition. The Lamenters' formal declaration of support for Huron sent shockwaves through the Imperium. Unlike some of the other chapters that joined the rebellion, the Lamenters had an unblemished record of loyalty and service. Their participation lent credibility to Huron's cause and suggested that the conflict might involve legitimate grievances rather than simple treachery. This perception would prove both beneficial and catastrophic for the chapter in the years that followed. The imperial response to the Badab rebellion was swift and overwhelming. Multiple loyal Space Marine chapters received deployment orders to the Maelstrom region, including the Red Scorpions, Minotaurs, and Fire Hawks. These forces, collectively known as the Loyalist Coalition, brought with them explicit orders to crush the rebellion and bring the renegade chapters to justice. The stage was set for a conflict that would pit Space Marine against Space Marine in some of the bloodiest fighting since the Horus Heresy. The Lamenters' first major engagement of the war occurred during the defense of the mining world of Sagan. Loyalist forces under the command of the Red Scorpions chapter had launched a surprise assault on the planet's orbital facilities, seeking to deny the rebels access to the rare minerals essential for maintaining their fleet. The Lamenters' Third Company, supported by elements of the Astral Claws, mounted a desperate defense of the primary mining complex against overwhelming odds. The battle for Sagan demonstrated both the Lamenters' tactical skill and the terrible cost of their loyalty to Huron. Captain Davian Thule led his warriors in a series of hit and run attacks against the Loyalist landing zones, using the planet's treacherous terrain to negate their enemies' numerical advantage. The Lamenters' knowledge of siege warfare proved invaluable as they transformed the mining complex into a fortress, establishing overlapping fields of fire and creating kill zones that channeled attacking forces into predetermined ambush sites. Despite their tactical success, the Lamenters paid a heavy price for holding Sagan. The Red Scorpions' methodical approach to siege warfare gradually wore down the defenders, and the Loyalists' superior numbers eventually told. The Third Company suffered 60% casualties before receiving orders to withdraw, leaving behind dozens of battle brothers whose gene seed could not be recovered. This loss would haunt the chapter throughout the remainder of the war, as their already limited numbers made every casualty a significant blow to their long-term survival. The Siege of Badab Primaris represented the war's climactic phase and the Lamenters' most significant contribution to Huron's cause. As Loyalist forces gradually conquered the outer systems of the Badab sector, the rebel chapters found themselves increasingly concentrated on Huron's fortress world. The Lamenters deployed their entire 1st and 2nd companies to the planet's defense, along with significant portions of their reserve companies and support elements. Badab Primaris had been transformed into one of the most heavily fortified worlds in the sector during Huron's years of preparation. Massive defensive installations ringed the planet's major cities, while underground tunnel networks allowed defenders to move between positions without exposing themselves to orbital bombardment. The Lamenters took responsibility for defending the northern continent's primary spaceport, a vital facility that allowed the rebels to maintain communication and supply lines with their remaining allies. The Loyalist assault on Badab Primaris began with a sustained orbital bombardment that lasted for weeks. The Lamenters endured this barrage in their underground bunkers, emerging periodically to repair damaged fortifications and tend to their wounded. The constant stress of the bombardment, combined with the knowledge that they were fighting fellow Space Marines, began to take a psychological toll on the chapter's battle brothers. Several warriors experienced episodes of the Black Rage during this period, though their battle brothers managed to restrain them before they could compromise defensive positions. When the Loyalist ground assault finally began, the Lamenters found themselves facing the Minotaur's chapter, whose reputation for brutal efficiency preceded them. The Minotaur's assault companies struck the spaceport's outer defenses with overwhelming force, accepting massive casualties in exchange for rapid territorial gains. The Lamenters' defensive positions, carefully prepared over months of preparation, crumbled under the sustained assault of warriors who seemed immune to fear or mercy. The fighting at the spaceport devolved into a series of brutal close-quarters engagements as Loyalist forces penetrated the outer defensive lines. The Lamenters' training in urban warfare served them well in these conditions, but they found themselves gradually pushed back toward the facility's central complex. Captain Foros personally led several counterattacks designed to buy time for civilian evacuations, though these efforts cost the chapter dearly in terms of veteran sergeants and specialized personnel. As the siege progressed, disturbing reports began reaching the Lamenters about Huron's conduct of the war. Stories circulated of the Astral Claw's master employing increasingly desperate measures to maintain his position, including the use of forbidden technologies and alliance with dubious allies. Some Lamenters' battle brothers reported seeing strange modifications among Astral Claw's warriors, while others spoke of unsettling changes in Huron's demeanor and decision-making processes. These concerns crystallized during a joint planning session when several Lamenters' officers witnessed Huron's violent reaction to news of a minor tactical setback. The Astral Claw's master's rage seemed to exceed normal bounds, and his proposed response involved targeting civilian populations in Loyalist-held territories. Captain Foros and his senior staff found themselves questioning not only the wisdom of their alliance, but the fundamental nature of the cause they were fighting for. The revelation of Huron's corruption became undeniable when Lamenters' reconnaissance teams discovered evidence of chaos rituals being conducted within Astral Claw's facilities. Symbols associated with the ruinous powers had begun appearing on weapons and armor, while some Astral Claw's warriors displayed physical mutations that could only result from warp exposure. The realization that they had allied themselves with traitors rather than rebels struck the Lamenters like a physical blow, calling into question everything they had fought and died for during the war. The chapter's response to this discovery sparked intense internal debate. Some battle brothers argued for immediate withdrawal from the conflict, claiming that their oaths to the Emperor superseded any obligations to Huron and his corrupted followers. Others maintained that abandoning their positions would result in the massacre of Imperial civilians who had supported the rebellion, and that honor demanded they continue fighting until these innocents could be evacuated to safety. Captain Foros ultimately chose a middle course that reflected both the chapter's noble intentions and their tragic fate. The Lamenters would continue defending their assigned positions, but would gradually disengage from joint operations with the Astral Claws. They would also attempt to establish communication with Loyalist forces to negotiate terms for their surrender, hoping to minimize bloodshed on both sides while accepting responsibility for their role in the rebellion. This decision came too late to prevent further tragedy. The Minotaurs, unaware of the Lamenters' change of heart, continued their relentless assault on the spaceport. The final battle for the facility saw the Lamenters' remaining defenders overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower, with Captain Foros himself falling while leading a desperate rearguard action to cover the evacuation of wounded battle brothers and civilian personnel. The fall of the spaceport marked the beginning of the end for the rebel cause on Badab Primaris. With their primary supply link severed, the remaining defenders found themselves increasingly isolated and under-equipped. The Lamenters' surviving companies withdrew to secondary positions, but their combat effectiveness had been severely compromised by the loss of so many veteran warriors and specialized equipment. The aftermath of Badab Primaris brought swift and merciless judgment upon the surviving Lamenters. As the Loyalist forces consolidated their victory across the Badab sector, the chapter found itself facing the full weight of imperial justice. The Inquisition, represented by Inquisitor Lord Militant Cyrus Aurelius and a tribunal of his peers, descended upon the remnants of the chapter with the authority to determine their ultimate fate. The surviving battle brothers, numbering fewer than 300 from their original 1,000-strong complement, were gathered on the orbital station Nemesis Tessera for formal judgment proceedings. The tribunal convened in the station's primary amphitheater, a vast chamber designed for ceremonial occasions that now served as a court of imperial justice. The surviving Lamenters' officers stood before the inquisitorial bench, their yellow and black armor bearing the scars of countless battles fought in service to a cause they now recognized as fundamentally corrupted. Captain Malachim Foros, having survived the final assault on Badab Primaris despite grievous wounds, served as the chapter's primary spokesman during the proceedings. Inquisitor Aurelius opened the tribunal with a comprehensive recitation of the charges against the Lamenters. The list included rebellion against lawful imperial authority, participation in the illegal seizure of tithe vessels, complicity in the deaths of loyalist space marines, and most damning of all, alliance with forces that had fallen to chaos corruption. Each charge carried potential penalties ranging from complete dissolution of the chapter to execution of all surviving members, making the gravity of their situation unmistakably clear. The Lamenters' defense rested primarily on their genuine ignorance of Huron's corruption during the early phases of the rebellion, and their attempts to disengage from the astral claws once the truth became apparent. Captain Foros presented detailed testimony regarding the chapter's motivations for joining Huron's cause, emphasizing their belief that they were serving the Emperor's interests by protecting imperial citizens from bureaucratic incompetence rather than supporting actual heresy. He also provided evidence of the chapter's efforts to minimize civilian casualties and their attempts to establish communication with loyalist forces during the final phases of the siege. The tribunal's deliberations lasted for 3 standard days, during which the inquisitors reviewed extensive documentation regarding the Lamenters' conduct throughout the war. Testimony from loyalist commanders provided mixed assessments of the chapter's behavior. While acknowledging their skill and courage in battle, several witnesses noted the Lamenters' reluctance to engage in the most brutal aspects of the conflict and their apparent attempts to limit collateral damage during urban fighting. These observations supported the chapter's claims of noble intentions, even as they confirmed their active participation in the rebellion. The final judgment reflected both the severity of the Lamenters' crimes and recognition of their fundamental loyalty to the Emperor. Rather than ordering the chapter's complete dissolution, the tribunal imposed a sentence of penitent crusade, a century-long period of atonement during which the surviving battle brothers would serve the Imperium in its most dangerous war zones, while operating under severe restrictions designed to demonstrate their renewed loyalty. This sentence represented a form of mercy within the harsh realities of imperial justice, offering the chapter a path to redemption through blood and sacrifice. The conditions of the penitent crusade were deliberately harsh and comprehensive in their scope. All chapter honors earned prior to the Badab War were formally stripped away, including battle honors, campaign badges, and ceremonial decorations that had adorned their armor and banners for decades. The chapter's sacred battle standards, many of which had been carried through dozens of victorious engagements, were confiscated and sealed away in inquisitorial vaults. These banners, bearing the names of fallen heroes and commemorating the chapter's finest moments, would remain beyond their reach until the Crusades' completion. The prohibition against recruiting new battle brothers represented perhaps the most crippling aspect of their punishment. The Lamenters were forbidden from establishing any form of recruitment infrastructure during their century of penance. Their existing apothecaries could continue to tend wounded battle brothers and maintain the chapter's gene seed stocks, but no new aspirants could be inducted into their ranks. This restriction meant that every casualty suffered during the crusade would permanently reduce their numbers, creating a constant pressure that emphasized the cost of their earlier choices. The chapter's fleet assets were similarly restricted as part of their punishment. Their battle barge Daughter of Tempests and several strike cruisers were confiscated by the Inquisition, leaving the Lamenters with only basic transport vessels and a single ancient strike cruiser, the Mater Lacrimarum, to support their operations. This vessel, dating back to the chapter's founding, became both their primary base of operations and a symbol of their reduced circumstances. The ship's machine spirits seemed to reflect the chapter's melancholy, with its corridors echoing with the sounds of morning hymns and its chapel adorned with memorials to the fallen. The Inquisition's assignment of war zones for the penitent crusade demonstrated their intention to test the Lamenters' resolve through constant exposure to the galaxy's most dangerous threats. Rather than allowing the chapter to choose their own deployment areas or coordinate with other Imperial forces, the Inquisition would direct their movements based on emerging crisis situations that required immediate intervention. This approach ensured that the Lamenters would face a continuous series of high-risk operations with minimal support and no opportunity for rest or recuperation between campaigns. The first assignment of their crusade came within weeks of the Tribunal's conclusion, directing the chapter to the Ghoul Stars region, where a massive Orc-Wa had emerged from the galactic rim. The Greenskin Horde, led by the notorious warboss Scarjo Ironteeth, had already devastated 3 Imperial systems and showed no signs of slowing its advance toward more heavily populated areas. The Lamenters received orders to conduct harassment operations against the Wa's supply lines, while larger Imperial forces assembled for a coordinated response. The deployment to the Ghoul Stars marked the beginning of what would become a pattern of isolation and desperate fighting that would define the next century of the chapter's existence. The Mater Lacrimarum arrived at the edge of the war zone to find Imperial forces in full retreat from Orc advances, with entire planetary defense forces either destroyed or scattered by the Greenskins' overwhelming numbers. The chapter's reduced strength meant that traditional Space Marine tactics of rapid deployment and decisive engagement had to be modified to account for their inability to sustain significant casualties. Captain Foros, now bearing the title of Chapter Master following the deaths of his superiors during the Badab War, developed new tactical doctrines that emphasized stealth, precision, and maximum damage infliction with minimal risk exposure. These methods represented a significant departure from the Lamenters' previous approach to warfare, which had favored direct engagement and heroic charges. The new reality of their situation demanded a more calculated approach that prioritized the chapter's long-term survival over immediate tactical gains. The campaign against warboss Ironteeth's forces stretched across multiple star systems and involved dozens of separate engagements over a period of 18 months. The Lamenters operated primarily as a raiding force, striking at Orc supply convoys, fuel depots, and communication installations before withdrawing to avoid retaliation. Their yellow and black armor became a feared sight among the Greenskins, who began referring to them as the Buzzing Death due to their hit and run tactics and distinctive coloration. Despite their tactical success in disrupting Orc operations, the campaign extracted a heavy toll from the chapter's already depleted ranks. The constant stress of operating without support or resupply began to manifest in increased incidents of the Black Rage among battle brothers who had previously shown no signs of succumbing to their genetic heritage. The isolation and pressure of their circumstances seemed to exacerbate the psychological instability inherent in their gene seed, creating additional challenges for the chapter's leadership to manage. Brother Sanguinary Priest Miros documented these incidents with clinical precision, noting patterns that suggested the stress of their penitent status was triggering genetic episodes at a higher rate than the chapter had experienced since their founding. His reports described battle brothers who would suddenly begin seeing enemies from the Horus heresy during combat operations, or who would become consumed with visions of their Primarch's death at the hands of the War Master. These episodes required immediate intervention to prevent affected warriors from compromising mission objectives or endangering their battle brothers. The psychological impact of their punishment extended beyond the manifestations of their genetic flaws. Many battle brothers struggled with feelings of guilt and shame over their role in the Badab War, questioning whether their loyalty to Huron had been genuine service to the Emperor or a fundamental betrayal of their oaths. These doubts were compounded by their isolation from other Imperial forces, who often viewed them with suspicion or outright hostility despite their official status as penitent rather than renegade. The chapter's chaplains worked tirelessly to maintain morale and spiritual discipline among the battle brothers during this difficult period. Chaplain Thaddeus composed new litanies specifically designed to address the unique challenges of their situation, emphasizing themes of redemption through sacrifice and the purifying nature of suffering endured in the Emperor's service. These prayers became central to the chapter's daily rituals, providing spiritual anchors for warriors struggling with doubt and despair. The successful conclusion of the campaign against Warboss Ironteeth brought no respite for the Lamenters. Within days of the Greenskin leader's death, new orders arrived directing the chapter to the Cadian sector, where Chaos forces had launched a series of coordinated raids against Imperial shipping lanes. The enemy consisted primarily of renegade space marines from the Red Corsairs, Huron's reconstituted warband that had emerged from the Eye of Terror following his transformation into a Chaos Lord. The irony of facing their former allies in battle was not lost on the Lamenters, serving as a constant reminder of the corruption they had narrowly avoided. The operations against the Red Corsairs proved even more challenging than the Orc campaign, as the enemy possessed intimate knowledge of Imperial tactics and equipment. The renegade Marines employed sophisticated ambush techniques and demonstrated a willingness to employ forbidden technologies that gave them significant advantages in several engagements. The Lamenters found themselves forced to adapt constantly to counter enemy strategies that seemed specifically designed to exploit their reduced numbers and limited resources. One particularly devastating engagement occurred in the asteroid belt surrounding the Mordian system, where a Lamenter's strike force encountered a Red Corsairs raiding party led by a former Astral Claws captain who had served alongside them during the Badab War. The enemy commander's knowledge of Lamenter's tactics and equipment allowed him to predict their movements with uncanny accuracy, resulting in a running battle that cost the chapter nearly an entire company's worth of battle brothers before they could disengage and withdraw to safety. The loss of so many experienced warriors in a single engagement highlighted the fundamental challenge facing the Lamenters during their crusade. Unlike other Space Marine chapters that could replace casualties through recruitment and training programs, every battle brother lost during their penance represented an irreplaceable reduction in their combat capability. This reality forced the chapter's leadership to become increasingly conservative in their tactical planning, prioritizing mission success over heroic gestures that might result in unnecessary casualties. The constant pressure of operating under these restrictions began to create subtle changes in the chapter's culture and identity. The traditional Lamenter's emphasis on protecting innocent civilians remained strong, but it was now tempered by a pragmatic understanding of their own limitations. Battle brothers learned to make difficult choices between competing objectives, sometimes accepting tactical withdrawals that would have been unthinkable during their earlier service. These adaptations were necessary for survival, but they came at the cost of the bold, self-sacrificing spirit that had originally defined the chapter's character. As their first decade of penance drew to a close, the Lamenters had participated in dozens of campaigns across multiple sectors of Imperial space. Their battle record during this period demonstrated both their continued effectiveness as a fighting force and the gradual erosion of their strength through constant deployment without replacement. The chapter that had begun the crusade with fewer than 300 battle brothers now numbered barely 200, with many of the survivors bearing wounds and scars that would never fully heal. The third decade of the Lamenters' penitent crusade brought with it their most devastating assignment yet: deployment to the Corinthian Crusade, a massive imperial offensive aimed at reclaiming the Corinth subsector from a sprawling orc empire that had festered there for over 2 centuries. The greenskin infestation had grown beyond a simple war into something far more dangerous: a stable, technologically advanced orc civilization that had learned to maintain its war machine through systematic conquest and industrial production, rather than the chaotic raiding typical of their species. Chapter Master Malachim Foros received the deployment orders aboard the Mater Lacrimarum as the ancient strike cruiser translated from warp space at the edge of the Corinth system. The vessel's auger arrays immediately detected the scope of the enemy presence. Dozens of ramshackle but functional space stations orbited the system's primary worlds, while massive orc kill cruisers patrolled the shipping lanes with an organization that spoke to sophisticated command structures. The Greenskins had transformed 3 entire worlds into fortress factories, each one pumping out crude but effective weapons and vehicles to supply their expanding empire. The Imperial response to this threat had been building for months before the Lamenters' arrival. The Corinthian Crusade represented one of the largest military operations mounted in the sector for decades, with elements from 12 different guard regiments, 3 Titan legions, and substantial naval assets committed to the offensive. The Lamenters found themselves assigned to the Crusade's 3rd Army Group, commanded by General Militant Corvanis Drachmus, a veteran of the Armageddon campaigns whose experience with orc warfare made him one of the Imperium's foremost experts on combating greenskin forces. The chapter's reduced strength meant they could contribute only 4 companies to the crusade, with their remaining battle brothers assigned to garrison duties aboard the Mater Lacrimarum and various support roles that kept the chapter's infrastructure functioning. These 180 warriors represented the entirety of the Lamenters' combat effective strength after 3 decades of constant warfare without recruitment, a number that would have constituted a single company in most Space Marine chapters, but now comprised their entire fighting force. General Drachmus assigned the Lamenters to spearhead operations against Skarjak Prime, the most heavily fortified of the 3 orc fortress worlds. The planet's surface had been transformed into a nightmare landscape of interconnected bunker complexes, weapon foundries, and slave pens, where captured human populations toiled to feed the Greenskins' war machine. Orbital reconnaissance revealed defensive positions that stretched across entire continents, with overlapping fields of fire from massive artillery pieces that could engage targets in low orbit. The initial assault on Skarjak Prime began with a sustained orbital bombardment that lasted for 6 standard days. The Lamenters watched from their drop pods as Navy vessels poured lance strikes and macro cannon fire into the planet's defensive installations, turning vast sections of the surface into seas of molten slag and radioactive craters. The bombardment's intensity exceeded anything the chapter had witnessed during their previous campaigns, yet when the barrage finally lifted, auger scans revealed that the orcs' deepest bunkers remained largely intact. Captain Davian Thule led the Lamenters' assault force in the first wave of drop pod deployments, targeting a massive industrial complex designated Objective Crimson by Imperial planners. The facility served as both a weapons factory and a command center for the surrounding defensive network, making its capture essential to breaking the orcs' organized resistance in the region. The drop zone lay at the heart of the complex, surrounded by towering smokestacks and assembly lines that continued operating even as Imperial forces descended from orbit. The drop pods slammed into the factory floor with bone-jarring impacts, their armored shells cracking open to disgorge squads of battle brothers into a hellish environment of superheated air, toxic fumes, and the constant din of industrial machinery. The Lamenters emerged from their pods to find themselves in the middle of a vast assembly hall, where hundreds of orc workers continued their tasks with typical greenskin disregard for danger. The aliens' initial reaction to the Space Marine assault was not panic but excitement, as they grabbed improvised weapons and charged toward the intruders with characteristic enthusiasm for violence. The fighting inside the factory complex immediately devolved into brutal close-quarters combat as the Lamenters advanced through narrow corridors and cramped workshops filled with heavy machinery. Their yellow and black armor became slick with alien blood as they carved through waves of orc workers, mech boys, and overseers who poured from every doorway and ventilation shaft. The industrial environment provided the greenskins with countless improvised weapons, welding torches, hydraulic presses, and spinning blade assemblies that they wielded with deadly effectiveness despite their crude construction. Sergeant Barachil of the 3rd Squad distinguished himself during the assault on the factory's power core, leading his warriors through a maze of coolant pipes and electrical conduits while under constant fire from orc defenders. The Greenskins had fortified the power station with scrap metal barricades and automated gun turrets, creating overlapping fields of fire that channeled the attacking Space Marines into predetermined kill zones. Barachil's tactical expertise allowed his squad to identify weak points in the defensive network, but exploiting these opportunities required exposing his warriors to sustained enemy fire. The sergeant's bold assault on the primary generator succeeded in crippling the facility's power grid, plunging vast sections of the complex into darkness and silencing dozens of automated defense systems. However, the victory came at a terrible cost. 3 of Barachil's battle brothers fell to orc fire during the approach, including brother Cassius, whose gene seed could not be recovered due to the intensity of enemy resistance. The loss of experienced warriors like Cassius represented not just tactical setbacks, but irreplaceable reductions in the chapter's already diminished strength. The capture of Objective Crimson required 18 hours of continuous fighting, with the Lamenters advancing floor by floor through the massive complex, while guard reinforcements secured the perimeter against orc counterattacks. The facility's upper levels housed the command centers, where orc big mechs coordinated the planet's industrial output, and these areas proved even more heavily defended than the factory floors below. The Greenskins had installed crude but effective force fields and automated weapon systems that forced the Space Marines to employ demolition charges and heavy weapons to clear each room. Captain Thule personally led the final assault on the complex's command center, a massive chamber filled with ramshackle communication equipment and tactical displays that somehow managed to coordinate defensive operations across half the continent. The orc warlord commanding the facility, a scarred veteran known as Scarfang the Builder, had fortified himself behind layers of scrap metal armor and surrounded himself with a bodyguard of heavily armed knobs. The final confrontation between Thule and Scarfang became a brutal melee that ranged across the command center as both warriors sought to gain advantage through superior positioning and tactical awareness. Thule's victory over the orc warlord came only after sustaining severe wounds that would plague him for the remainder of the campaign. Scarfang's massive power claw had torn through the captain's left pauldron and inflicted deep lacerations that required immediate medical attention from the chapter's apothecaries. The injury limited Thule's mobility and forced him to rely more heavily on his subordinates for tactical coordination, placing additional stress on the chapter's already stretched command structure. The successful capture of Objective Crimson marked only the beginning of the Lamenters' involvement in the Corinthian Crusade. Imperial intelligence had identified 17 similar facilities across Scarjack Prime's surface, each one requiring specialized assault techniques that played to the Space Marines' strengths in urban warfare and close-quarters combat. The chapter found itself committed to a grinding campaign of facility assaults that would stretch their resources to the breaking point over the following months. The second major engagement occurred at a sprawling vehicle assembly plant designated Objective Azure, where the orcs produced the bulk of their armored vehicles and aircraft. The facility covered an area equivalent to a small city, with multiple production lines, testing grounds, and storage facilities protected by extensive anti-aircraft defenses and mobile patrols. The Lamenters' approach to this target required coordination with Titan elements from the Legio Crucius, whose war engines provided the heavy firepower necessary to breach the facility's outer defenses. The assault on Objective Azure began at dawn on the campaign's 43rd day, with Warhound Titans advancing across the facility's perimeter, while Lamenters drop pods targeted key defensive positions. The coordination between the massive war engines and the Space Marine infantry required precise timing and communication, as the Titans' weapons could easily cause catastrophic casualties among friendly forces if deployed incorrectly. Chapter Master Foros personally coordinated the assault from orbit, using the Mater Lacrimarum's communication systems to maintain contact with both Titan crews and ground forces. The battle for the vehicle plant showcased the Lamenters' tactical flexibility as they adapted their assault techniques to account for the facility's unique challenges. Unlike the enclosed spaces of Objective Crimson, the vehicle plant featured vast open areas where Orc armor could maneuver freely and bring their superior numbers to bear against the attacking Space Marines. The chapter's response involved deploying their few remaining bikes and land speeders in harassment roles, drawing enemy vehicles into prepared ambush sites where concentrated fire could neutralize them before they could respond effectively. Brother Sergeant Lamenters led one of the most successful ambush operations during the Azure assault, positioning his Devastator squad in the ruins of a collapsed assembly building, where they could engage enemy armor with las cannons and missile launchers. The sergeant's tactical acumen allowed his warriors to destroy 7 Orc battle wagons and 3 looted Imperial tanks before enemy forces could locate and eliminate their position. However, the final phase of the engagement saw Lamenters himself fall to Orc fire as he attempted to retrieve wounded battle brothers from an exposed position. The loss of experienced sergeants like Lamenters represented a crisis for the chapter's command structure, as their reduced numbers meant that replacing fallen leaders required promoting battle brothers who lacked the years of experience typically expected of Space Marine non-commissioned officers. These battlefield promotions, while necessary for maintaining unit cohesion, placed additional stress on warriors who were already struggling with the psychological pressures of constant combat and genetic instability. The capture of Objective Azure required 4 days of sustained fighting and cost the Lamenters another 23 battle brothers, including several specialists whose skills could not be easily replaced. The chapter's Tech Marines, in particular, suffered heavily during the facility's capture, as their expertise made them prime targets for Orc snipers and assault troops. The loss of these technical specialists would have long-term implications for the chapter's ability to maintain their equipment and vehicles throughout the remainder of the campaign. The third phase of the Lamenters' participation in the Corinthian Crusade focused on urban warfare in the sprawling Orc city of Scarjack Primaris, the planet's de facto capital and the seat of the Greenskin Empire's ruling warlord. The city represented the culmination of 2 centuries of Orc civilization, with towering spires of scrap metal and concrete housing millions of greenskins and their enslaved human populations. The urban environment presented unique challenges that played to neither the Lamenters' strengths in precision warfare, nor their enemies' advantages in numbers and heavy weapons. Chapter Master Foros deployed the chapter's remaining forces in a series of coordinated strikes against key infrastructure targets within the city, seeking to disrupt enemy command and control systems, while avoiding the massive casualties that would result from direct assaults on heavily fortified positions. These operations required the Lamenters to operate in small teams, often at squad level or below, while maintaining coordination across a battlefield that stretched across hundreds of square kilometers of urban terrain. The fighting in Scarjack Primaris proved to be the bloodiest phase of the entire campaign for the Lamenters. The urban environment negated many of the tactical advantages that Space Marines typically enjoyed, forcing them to fight building by building through structures designed by alien minds with no regard for human architectural principles. Orc defenders had turned every structure into a potential fortress, with overlapping fields of fire, hidden passages, and booby traps that claimed the lives of even experienced battle brothers. Brother Captain Erasmus Tycho, commanding the chapter's 2nd Company, led a particularly desperate assault on the city's primary communication center, a massive tower that coordinated defensive operations across the entire urban area. The approach to the tower required advancing through 3 kilometers of densely packed residential areas, where every building contained potential ambush sites. Tycho's company suffered continuous casualties during the advance, with individual squads becoming separated and forced to fight independent actions against superior numbers of enemy troops. The final assault on the communication tower saw Captain Tycho make the ultimate sacrifice to ensure his mission's success. With his company reduced to fewer than 30 battle brothers and surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces, the captain chose to detonate the tower's power core manually, knowing that the explosion would destroy both the target and himself. His sacrifice eliminated the Orcs' ability to coordinate their citywide defense, but cost the Lamenters, one of their most experienced commanders, and several additional battle brothers who died attempting to extract their captain before the detonation. The loss of Captain Tycho marked a turning point in the chapter's participation in the Corinthian Crusade. With their command structure decimated and their numbers reduced to fewer than 90 combat-effective battle brothers, the Lamenters could no longer maintain independent operations at company level. Chapter Master Foros was forced to reorganize his remaining forces into composite units that combined elements from different companies, a practice that violated traditional Space Marine doctrine but represented the only viable option for continued combat effectiveness. The campaign's final phase saw the Lamenters assigned to support operations rather than spearhead assaults, a role that reflected both their reduced capabilities and the respect they had earned through their sacrificial service. General Drachmus recognized that the chapter had given everything they possessed to the Crusade's success, and he ensured that their remaining warriors were employed in ways that maximized their tactical expertise while minimizing unnecessary casualties. The Corinthian Crusade concluded with the death of the Orc Empire's supreme warlord and the systematic destruction of the Greenskins' industrial infrastructure. The victory represented a significant strategic success for the Imperium, eliminating a major threat to the sector's stability and freeing up millions of enslaved humans for resettlement. However, the cost of this success had been enormous, with casualty figures reaching into the hundreds of thousands across all participating imperial forces. For the Lamenters, the Corinthian Crusade represented both their finest hour and their greatest tragedy. The chapter's tactical brilliance and willingness to sacrifice everything for victory had earned them recognition from the highest levels of imperial command, with General Drachmus personally commending their service in his final campaign reports. Yet this recognition came at the cost of reducing the chapter to a shadow of its former strength, with barely enough battle brothers remaining to crew a single strike cruiser. The survivors of the Corinthian Crusade bore the physical and psychological scars of their service in ways that would define the remainder of their penitent crusade. Many battle brothers carried wounds that would never fully heal, while others struggled with the memories of watching their brothers die in seemingly endless succession. The chapter's chaplains worked tirelessly to maintain morale and spiritual discipline among the survivors, but even their efforts could not entirely address the profound sense of loss that permeated the chapter's remaining ranks. As the Mater Lacrimarum departed the Corinth system, carrying the last survivors of a once proud chapter, the Lamenters faced the grim reality that their penitent crusade might end not with redemption, but with extinction. Their sacrifice during the Corinthian Crusade had demonstrated their unwavering loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium, but it had also brought them to the brink of annihilation. The decades that remained of their penance would test whether the chapter possessed the will to survive long enough to see their redemption, or whether their curse would finally claim the last of Sanguinius's most tragic sons. The Lamenters emerged from the Corinthian Crusade as mere shadows of their former strength, their ranks reduced to fewer than 90 battle brothers scattered across the ancient strike cruiser Mater Lacrimarum. The vessel's corridors, once filled with the sounds of 1,000 warriors preparing for battle, now echoed with an oppressive silence broken only by the distant hum of life support systems and the occasional footsteps of solitary battle brothers moving between duty stations. Chapter Master Malachim Pharos found himself commanding what amounted to little more than a reinforced company, yet the Inquisition's demands for their continued service showed no mercy for their depleted state. The orders that arrived in the year 992 of the 41st millennium carried the crimson seal of the Ordo Xenos and bore news that would test the chapter's resolve beyond anything they had previously endured. Massive biosignatures had been detected moving through the void beyond the eastern fringe, their trajectory aimed directly at populated Imperial worlds. The Tyranids had returned in numbers that dwarfed previous incursions, and this new hive fleet's approach patterns suggested a level of strategic coordination that exceeded anything previously encountered. Imperial xenobiologists had designated this threat Hive Fleet Kraken, and early reports indicated that its bioships possessed adaptive capabilities that rendered many traditional defensive measures obsolete. The Lamenters received deployment orders to the Icar system, where advanced tendrils of Hive Fleet Kraken had begun systematic harvesting operations across 3 agricultural worlds. These splinter fleets operated with disturbing efficiency, stripping entire continents of biomass, while simultaneously adapting their organisms to counter local resistance patterns. Imperial forces in the region had suffered catastrophic losses attempting to halt the Tyranid advance, with entire guard regiments consumed by swarms of bioforms that seemed to evolve new capabilities with each engagement. The Mater Lacrimarum translated into the Icar system to find a scene of devastation that exceeded even the orbital bombardments of the Corinthian Crusade. The primary world, Icar 4, had been transformed into a nightmarish landscape where massive spore chimneys pumped clouds of toxic organisms into the atmosphere, while capillary towers drained the planet's oceans into the bellies of waiting bioships. The planet's surface writhed with movement as countless Tyranid organisms scuttled between processing facilities, their chitinous forms reflecting the sickly light of a sun obscured by biological particulates. Chapter Master Pharos studied the tactical displays with growing unease as his surviving officers gathered in the strike cruiser's stratagem. The enemy forces visible on the planet's surface represented only a fraction of the Hive fleet's total strength, yet their numbers exceeded anything the Lamenters had faced during their decades of penance. Massive bioships hung in orbit like predatory insects, their hull-mounted weapons tracking Imperial vessels with organic precision, while smaller organisms swarmed between them in patterns that suggested complex communication networks. The Imperial defense of Icar 4 centered around Hive Tertius, the planet's largest remaining population center and the site of its primary spaceport. The city's governor, militant commander Vex Corvanis, had transformed the urban area into a fortress using every available resource and defensive structure. Massive walls of ferrocrete and plasteel surrounded the Hive's perimeter, while automated defense turrets and artillery batteries provided overlapping fields of fire against approaching bioforms. Despite these preparations, reconnaissance flights revealed that Tyranid forces had already begun establishing forward positions within striking distance of the city's outer defenses. The Lamenters' first encounter with Hive Fleet Kraken occurred during their initial deployment to Hive Tertius, where they were tasked with reinforcing the city's eastern wall against a massive swarm assault. The chapter's remaining battle brothers deployed via drop pod directly into the defensive positions, their yellow and black armor standing out starkly against the gray ferrocrete of the fortifications. The Tyranid assault began at dawn with a living tide of bioforms that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Hormagaunts bounded across the blasted wasteland in their millions, their scything claws gleaming in the pale sunlight, while larger Tyranid warriors directed their advance with chittering vocalizations that carried across the battlefield like alien battle hymns. Behind this initial wave came the truly massive bioforms, carnifexes that stood 3 times the height of a space marine, their bone-white carapaces scarred by previous battles, and their weapon symbiotes already adapting to the defensive fire that poured down from the walls. Brother Sergeant Thaddeus commanded the Lamenters' primary fire support position, a reinforced bunker that housed the chapter's few remaining heavy weapons. His Devastator squad had been reduced to 4 battle brothers following the Corinthian Crusade, but their experience with alien warfare made them invaluable assets in the defense of Hive Tertius. The sergeant's tactical expertise allowed him to identify priority targets among the approaching swarm, directing concentrated fire against the larger bioforms that served as command nodes for the smaller organisms. The effectiveness of the Lamenters' initial defensive fire became apparent as their last cannon strikes began dropping Tyrannid warriors with precise headshots that severed the synaptic links controlling nearby Hormigaunt swarms. Without their guiding influence, the smaller bioforms began attacking each other or wandering aimlessly across the battlefield, creating gaps in the assault that the defenders could exploit with concentrated artillery fire. However, this tactical advantage proved temporary as the Hive fleet's adaptive mechanisms began responding to the Space Marines' targeting patterns. The first sign of Tyrannid adaptation came when Brother Castor's last cannon's strike against a particularly large warrior failed to penetrate its cranial carapace, the beam dispersing harmlessly across bone plates that had somehow developed reflective properties during the course of the battle. Subsequent shots revealed that multiple warrior bioforms had undergone similar modifications, their head armor now capable of deflecting or absorbing directed energy weapons. The speed of this adaptation shocked even the experienced Lamenters, who had never encountered an enemy capable of evolving countermeasures in real time during active combat. The Tyrannid assault on the eastern wall intensified as larger bioforms reached the defensive positions, their massive claws and bioweapons carving through ferrocrete and steel with disturbing ease. A Carnifex designated Alpha 7 by Imperial observers smashed through a section of the wall using its crushing claws, creating a breach that immediately filled with swarming Hormigaunts. The creature's carapace bore scars from multiple last cannon hits, yet it continued advancing despite wounds that should have proved fatal to any normal organism. Captain Davian Thule led a desperate counterattack against the breach, his remaining tactical marines advancing into close combat with the swarming bioforms, while heavy weapons teams provided covering fire from elevated positions. The fighting devolved into a brutal melee as Space Marines found themselves surrounded by chittering aliens whose claws could penetrate even power armor with sufficient force. Thule's power sword carved through Hormigaunt carapaces with each swing, but for every alien he killed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The captain's tactical acumen became crucial as he identified weak points in the Tyrannid assault formation, directing his Marines to target the larger warrior bioforms that served as synaptic nodes for the smaller organisms. However, the aliens' adaptive capabilities manifested again as the warriors began positioning themselves behind cover or within swarms of expendable Hormigaunts, making precision targeting increasingly difficult. The Tyrannids were learning from each engagement, modifying their tactics to counter Imperial responses with unsettling intelligence. Brother Apothecary Malachar worked frantically to treat wounded battle brothers during brief lulls in the fighting, his medical expertise pushed to its limits by injuries inflicted by alien bioweapons. The Tyrannid organisms employed a variety of toxic compounds and digestive acids that complicated treatment protocols, with some wounds continuing to deteriorate even after the initial trauma had been addressed. The apothecary's gene seed extraction duties became increasingly urgent as battle brothers fell to wounds that would have been survivable against conventional enemies. The defense of the Eastern Wall cost the Lamenters 12 battle brothers during the first day of fighting alone, reducing their effective strength to fewer than 80 warriors. Each casualty represented not just a tactical loss, but an irreplaceable reduction in the chapter's already catastrophic numbers. Chapter Master Foros found himself making increasingly desperate calculations about how long his remaining forces could maintain combat effectiveness against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each engagement. The second phase of the Tyrannid assault on Hive Tertius began 3 days later, with the arrival of even larger bioforms that dwarfed anything previously encountered. Biotitans emerged from the organic processing facilities that had sprouted across the planet's surface, their massive forms supported by dozens of legs, while weapon symbiotes the size of battle tanks tracked targets across the city's skyline. These creatures represented the pinnacle of tyrannid bioengineering, living weapons platforms that combined the mobility of organic life with firepower that rivaled Imperial Titans. The appearance of the Biotitans forced a complete reorganization of the Imperial defense, as conventional weapons proved largely ineffective against their heavily armored carapaces and regenerative capabilities. The creatures' bioplasma weapons could melt through ferrocrete walls in seconds, while their massive claws could tear apart armored vehicles with contemptuous ease. The Lamenters found themselves reassigned to mobile response duties, using their superior mobility and tactical expertise to coordinate counterattacks against the massive organisms. Brother Sergeant Lamenters led a desperate assault against one of the smaller Biotitans, a creature designated Omega-3 that had begun systematically destroying the Hive's water treatment facilities. His assault squad approached the target, using the ruins of collapsed buildings for cover, their jump packs allowing them to navigate the devastated urban terrain while avoiding the creature's primary weapon systems. The sergeant's tactical planning emphasized speed and precision, recognizing that prolonged engagement would inevitably favor the massively superior bioform. The assault on Omega-3 demonstrated both the Lamenters' tactical excellence and the horrifying adaptability of their enemies. Lamenters' initial attack succeeded in severing several of the Biotitan's weapon symbiotes, temporarily reducing its offensive capabilities and creating an opportunity for follow-up strikes. However, the creature's response revealed new defensive adaptations that had not been present in previous encounters. Its carapace began secreting a toxic cloud that forced the attacking Space Marines to withdraw or risk poisoning through their armor's filtration systems. The toxic defense mechanism represented a new level of tyrannid adaptation that went beyond simple armor modifications or tactical adjustments. The Hive fleet was developing entirely new biological capabilities in response to Imperial tactics, creating organisms that could counter specific threats through evolutionary processes that should have required generations to complete. This realization sent shock waves through the Imperial command structure as strategists grappled with an enemy that could literally evolve countermeasures faster than new tactics could be developed. The fighting around Hive Tertius continued for 2 weeks as Imperial forces gradually fell back through successive defensive lines, each withdrawal costing precious lives and equipment while buying only temporary respite from the Tyrannid advance. The Lamenters found themselves increasingly isolated as other Imperial units were consumed or scattered by the alien assault, their distinctive yellow and black armor becoming a rallying point for surviving defenders who had lost contact with their own command structures. Chapter Master Foros made the decision to consolidate his remaining forces for a final stand at the Hive's central spaceport, recognizing that further dispersal of his battle brothers would only accelerate their destruction without providing meaningful tactical advantages. The spaceport represented the last hope for civilian evacuation from the planet, and its defense aligned with the chapter's fundamental mission to protect innocent Imperial citizens. The Lamenters' 63 surviving battle brothers took up positions around the facility's perimeter, preparing for what many recognized might be their final battle. The Tyrannid assault on the spaceport began with a coordinated attack by multiple Biotitans supported by vast swarms of smaller organisms, their approach coordinated with a precision that spoke to the Hive mind's growing understanding of Imperial defensive patterns. The aliens had learned to combine their various bioforms into integrated assault formations that maximized their individual strengths while compensating for tactical weaknesses. Flying organisms provided reconnaissance and close air support, while ground forces advanced under covering fire from long-range bioweapons. The final battle for Hive Tertius lasted 18 hours and saw the near-complete destruction of the Lamenters as an effective fighting force. The chapter's battle brothers fought with desperate courage as they were gradually overwhelmed by sheer numbers and the aliens' adaptive capabilities. Captain Thule fell during the defense of Landing Bay 7, his power sword finally failing as its energy cell was drained by constant combat against chitinous carapaces. Brother Sergeant Thaddeus died, manning a heavy bolter position that had been overrun by hormagaunts, his final shots accounting for dozens of aliens before their claws found gaps in his armor. Chapter Master Foros survived the battle through a combination of tactical skill and what could only be described as the Lamenters' characteristic cursed luck. His final stand took place in the spaceport's control tower, where he coordinated the evacuation of the last civilian transports while fighting off waves of tyrannid organisms that had penetrated the facility's inner defenses. The Chapter Master's artificer armor bore the scars of dozens of alien weapons by the time Imperial Navy vessels arrived to extract the survivors, its yellow paint stripped away to reveal the bare ceramite beneath. The evacuation from Hive Tertius marked the effective end of the Lamenters as a Space Marine chapter. Only 16 battle brothers survived the Tyrannid assault, their numbers so reduced that they could barely crew essential positions aboard the Mater Lacrimarum. The ancient strike cruiser departed the Icar system, carrying the last remnants of a chapter that had once numbered 1,000 warriors, its holds filled with civilian refugees, rather than the triumphant battle brothers who should have occupied those spaces. The encounter with Hive Fleet Kraken's splinter fleets had demonstrated the futility of conventional tactics against an enemy that could adapt and evolve in real time. The Tyrannid's ability to develop countermeasures during active combat represented a paradigm shift in xenobiological warfare that would influence Imperial military doctrine for decades to come. The Lamenters' sacrifice had bought time for civilian evacuations and provided valuable intelligence about Tyrannid capabilities, but the cost had been the near extinction of an entire Space Marine chapter. The surviving battle brothers bore physical and psychological wounds that would never fully heal, their experiences on Icar 4 having exposed them to horrors that challenged even Space Marine conditioning. Several survivors showed signs of increased genetic instability, with the stress of their ordeal triggering episodes of the Black Rage that had remained dormant for decades. The chapter's gene seed stocks, carefully preserved throughout their penitent crusade, now represented the only hope for the Lamenters' eventual reconstruction, assuming they could survive long enough to see their penance completed. The Mater Lacrimarum limped away from the Icar system, carrying its precious cargo of survivors and refugees, its machine spirits seeming to mourn the loss of so many battle brothers who had served aboard the vessel for decades. The strike cruiser's corridors, already emptied by previous campaigns, now felt like a tomb dedicated to the memory of warriors who had given everything in service to the Emperor. The few remaining Lamenters faced an uncertain future, their chapter reduced to a mere handful of survivors from what had once been one of the Imperium's most promising Space Marine chapters. The Mater Lacrimarum drifted through the void, carrying the last 16 survivors of what had once been a 1,000-strong Space Marine chapter, its ancient hull bearing scars from countless battles fought during the Lamenters' century of penance. The strike cruiser had become more than a mere vessel. It served as the chapter's mobile fortress monastery, housing their most sacred relics and maintaining the traditions that connected them to their origins as sons of Sanguinius. Within its corridors, the surviving battle brothers had created a sanctuary dedicated to preserving their chapter's memory and honoring the thousands of brothers who had fallen during their cursed existence. The vessel's transformation into a fortress monastery had occurred gradually throughout the penitent crusade, as the Lamenters adapted their limited space to accommodate the spiritual and practical needs of a Space Marine chapter operating without a fixed base of operations. The ship's original design as a strike cruiser provided ample room for modification, with cargo bays converted into training facilities and crew quarters reorganized to create the sacred spaces essential to Astartes' culture. The machine spirits of the ancient vessel seemed to approve of these changes, with systems operating more smoothly and efficiently as the ship embraced its new role as the chapter's spiritual heart. The Reclusium occupied the vessel's most prominent location, situated in what had once been the primary assembly hall, where battle brothers gathered before major deployments. The sacred space stretched across 3 decks, its vaulted ceiling decorated with frescoes depicting the Emperor's ascension and Sanguinius's sacrifice during the final moments of the Horus heresy. These artworks had been painstakingly created by the chapter's battle brothers during the long void transits between campaigns, their hands guided by genetic memories inherited from their angelic Primarch's artistic nature. Chaplain Thaddeus had overseen the Reclusiam's design and construction, ensuring that every element served both practical and spiritual purposes in maintaining the chapter's traditions. The chamber's centerpiece was a massive altar carved from a single block of black marble, recovered from the ruins of a destroyed imperial cathedral on Badab Primaris. The altar's surface bore the names of every Lamenter's battle brother who had fallen since the chapter's founding, etched in flowing script that required constant maintenance as new names were added with depressing regularity. The walls surrounding the altar displayed the chapter's sacred banners, though most bore the scars of battle and the passage of time. The original company standards had been confiscated during the tribunal following the Badab War, leaving the surviving battle brothers to create new banners that honored their fallen while acknowledging their penitent status. These replacement standards incorporated traditional Lamenters heraldry with subtle modifications that reflected their current circumstances. The bleeding heart symbol appeared more prominent, while the yellow and black checkerboard pattern showed deliberate imperfections that symbolized the chapter's fallen state. The banner of sorrows held the place of honor above the main altar, its silk fabric bearing the names of every major engagement fought during the penitent crusade. The banner's design featured a stylized representation of the Mater Lacrimarum, surrounded by golden tears, each drop representing a company lost during their century of atonement. Brother Tecmarine Valerius had crafted the banner's frame from adamantium, recovered from destroyed power armor, creating a memorial that literally incorporated the remains of fallen battle brothers into its structure. Daily services in the Reclusiam followed modified versions of traditional Space Marine liturgies, adapted to address the unique spiritual challenges faced by the surviving Lamenters. Chaplain Thaddeus had composed new hymns that emphasized themes of redemption through sacrifice while acknowledging the weight of their genetic curse. These ceremonies served multiple purposes beyond simple worship. They provided psychological anchoring for battle brothers struggling with survivor guilt and helped maintain unit cohesion among warriors who had witnessed the destruction of their entire chapter. The Reclusiam's secondary chambers housed the chapter's most precious relics, each item carefully preserved and maintained despite the harsh conditions of constant warfare. The Chalice of Tears, forged from the melted remains of Captain Tycho's power sword, contained sanctified water blessed by the chapter's chaplains during their most solemn ceremonies. The chalice's bowl bore microscopic engravings of every battle brother's name, visible only under intense magnification, but serving as a constant reminder of the chapter's losses. The Scroll of Lamentations occupied a climate-controlled display case near the main altar, its ancient parchment containing the original charter granted to the chapter during the 21st founding. The document's edges had been damaged during the evacuation from Badab Primaris, but its core text remained legible, serving as a tangible connection to the chapter's origins and their original mission to serve the Emperor. Beside the charter lay the Crimson Codex, a modified version of the Codex Astartes annotated with tactical observations and lessons learned during their decades of penance. The Apothecarion represented the chapter's most critical facility, housing the precious gene seed stalks that represented their only hope for eventual reconstruction. Brother Apothecary Malachar had overseen the facility's design with obsessive attention to detail, recognizing that any contamination or degradation of their genetic legacy would doom the chapter to permanent extinction. The medical bay occupied 2 full decks of the strike cruiser, with redundant life support systems and multiple layers of biological containment to protect the irreplaceable genetic material. The gene seed storage vaults employed technology that dated back to the Great Crusade, their stasis fields powered by the ship's primary reactor to ensure uninterrupted preservation of the precious biological samples. Each sample was cataloged with exhaustive detail, including the donor's service record, genetic markers, and any notable characteristics that might influence future implantation procedures. Malachar's laboratory facilities included advanced genetic analysis equipment salvaged from various battlefields during the Penitent Crusade, allowing him to monitor the stored gene seed for signs of degradation or mutation. The apothecary's research had revealed subtle changes in the chapter's genetic structure that seemed to correlate with their exposure to various alien influences, particularly the psychic emanations encountered during their battles against Tyrannid forces. These modifications were not necessarily harmful, but they represented evolutionary pressures that could influence the chapter's future development. The medical bay's surgical suites maintained the capability to perform full gene seed implantation procedures, though the lack of suitable candidates meant these facilities remained unused throughout the Penitent Crusade. The equipment required constant maintenance to prevent degradation, with Techmarine Valerius dedicating significant time to ensuring that every instrument remained in perfect working condition for the day when the chapter might again be permitted to recruit new battle brothers. The Apothecarian's memorial wall displayed the genetic markers of every battle brother whose gene seed had been successfully recovered, creating a biological record of the chapter's service that complemented the spiritual memorials in the Reclusiam. Each marker was accompanied by a brief service record and the circumstances of the warrior's death, providing context for future generations who might study the chapter's history. The wall's lower sections contained empty spaces reserved for the gene seed of the 16 survivors, a grim reminder of their probable fate. The chapter's armory occupied the vessel's former cargo bays, its contents representing the accumulated weapons and equipment of a Space Marine chapter, reduced to a single squad's worth of survivors. Master of the Forge Valerius had organized the facility with meticulous care, ensuring that every weapon remained in perfect condition despite years of storage and limited maintenance resources. The armory's displays included power weapons that had served the chapter for centuries, their machine spirits carefully tended through regular ritual maintenance and ceremonial activation. The blade Sorrowful occupied the armory's place of honor, a master-crafted power sword that had belonged to the chapter's first master. The weapon's energy field generator had been modified to produce a distinctive golden glow that complemented the chapter's heraldry, while its adamantium blade bore microscopic engravings of the chapter's founding oath. The sword had been wielded by every chapter master since the 21st founding, its grip worn smooth by generations of hands that had guided the Lamenters through triumph and disaster. The armory's vehicle bay housed the chapter's few remaining tanks and transports, their hulls bearing the scars of countless battles, while their machine spirits maintained perfect operational readiness. The Rhino transport Tears of Angels had served the chapter since their early campaigns, its armor-bearing kill markings from dozens of different alien species encountered during their service. The vehicle's interior had been modified to serve as a mobile shrine, with small alcoves containing relics and memorial items that connected its crew to their fallen brothers. The Hall of Remembrance contained personal effects and mementos from battle brothers who had fallen during the Penitent Crusade, each item carefully preserved and displayed according to strict protocols established by Chaplain Thaddeus. These artifacts ranged from simple personal items like carved bone dice to more significant pieces such as campaign medals and commendation scrolls. The collection served multiple purposes, honoring the dead, providing comfort to the living, and maintaining the chapter's cultural continuity despite their reduced circumstances. The chapter's original gene seed vaults had been constructed in the deepest levels of the fortress monastery, protected by multiple layers of physical and spiritual barriers designed to preserve their genetic legacy against any conceivable threat. These facilities had included not only storage areas, but also complete laboratory complexes where the chapter's apothecaries could conduct advanced genetic research and develop new medical techniques. The vault's destruction during the Inquisition's seizure of chapter assets had been one of the most devastating losses suffered during their punishment. The training facilities within the fortress monastery had been specifically designed to prepare recruits for the unique challenges they would face as Lamenters, with obstacle courses and combat simulators that emphasized the tactical flexibility and psychological resilience required for their cursed existence. The chapter's chaplains had worked closely with training cadre to develop programs that strengthened mental barriers against the Black Rage, while channeling the Battle Brothers' natural compassion into effective military service. The fortress monastery's libraries had contained extensive records of the chapter's history, including detailed accounts of their genetic modifications during the 21st founding and comprehensive analyses of their ongoing struggle with their Sanguinian heritage. These documents had represented irreplaceable resources for understanding the chapter's unique characteristics and developing strategies for managing their genetic instabilities. Their loss during the Inquisition's investigation had eliminated centuries of accumulated knowledge that could never be fully replaced. The Lamenters' approach to warfare had evolved dramatically throughout their cursed existence, shaped by the dual pressures of their genetic heritage and the harsh realities of their perpetual punishment. Unlike their parent chapter, the Blood Angels, whose combat doctrine emphasized aggressive assault tactics and overwhelming force projection, the Lamenters had developed a more measured approach that prioritized the protection of Imperial civilians and the preservation of their dwindling numbers. This evolution reflected both practical necessity and the chapter's fundamental character, warriors who viewed their superhuman abilities as a sacred trust to be employed in defense of humanity's most vulnerable populations. The chapter's adherence to honorable warfare remained unwavering despite their reputation as cursed and their status as penitent crusaders. Where other Space Marine chapters might accept collateral damage as an inevitable cost of victory, the Lamenters consistently chose more difficult tactical approaches that minimized harm to non-combatants. This commitment to protecting Imperial civilians had manifested repeatedly throughout their service record, from their careful evacuation procedures during the siege of Badab Primaris to their desperate defense of refugee transports during the Tyrannid assault on Ikar IV. The chapter's battle brothers understood that their genetic curse made them objects of suspicion and fear among the very people they sought to protect, yet this knowledge only strengthened their resolve to prove their nobility through actions rather than words. The tactical preferences that emerged from decades of penitent service emphasized defensive operations as the cornerstone of Lamenters' doctrine. Their experience fighting desperate rearguard actions, while outnumbered and under-equipped, had taught them to maximize the effectiveness of prepared positions and coordinated fields of fire. The chapter's tech marines became experts at rapidly fortifying positions using whatever materials were available, often incorporating alien technology or battlefield debris into defensive networks that could channel enemy forces into predetermined kill zones. This expertise proved invaluable during extended sieges, where traditional Space Marine mobility advantages were negated by enemy numbers or environmental conditions. Urban warfare represented another area where the Lamenters had developed specialized expertise born from necessity. The cramped confines of hive cities and industrial complexes negated many of the advantages typically enjoyed by Space Marines, forcing the chapter to adapt their tactics to environments where every corridor could conceal an ambush and every room might contain innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The Battle Brothers learned to move through urban terrain with exceptional stealth and precision, using their enhanced senses to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants even in the chaos of active combat zones. The chapter's approach to urban combat emphasized small unit tactics that allowed individual squads to operate independently while maintaining coordination through sophisticated communication networks. Sergeants received extensive training in rapid tactical assessment, enabling them to make split-second decisions about engagement parameters that balanced mission objectives against civilian safety. This decentralized command structure proved essential during operations where traditional company-level coordination became impossible due to enemy interference or environmental hazards. Last stand scenarios had become an unfortunate specialty for the Lamenters, their reduced numbers frequently forcing them into situations where retreat was impossible and victory could only be achieved through supreme sacrifice. The chapter's battle brothers had developed an almost supernatural ability to extract maximum tactical advantage from hopeless situations, using their genetic enhancements and superior equipment to inflict disproportionate casualties on enemy forces, while buying precious time for civilian evacuations or strategic withdrawals by Allied units. These desperate engagements had earned the chapter grudging respect from other Imperial forces, even those who viewed their cursed reputation with suspicion. The integration of Blood Angels' traditions into Lamenters' combat doctrine required careful adaptation to account for their unique circumstances and reduced strength. The traditional Blood Angels' emphasis on rapid assault and close combat remained relevant, but the Lamenters had learned to employ these tactics more selectively and with greater consideration for potential casualties. The chapter's assault squads received additional training in precision strikes against high-value targets, using their mobility and shock value to eliminate enemy commanders or critical infrastructure, rather than engaging in prolonged melee combat that might result in unsustainable losses. The Death Company protocols inherited from their parent chapter presented unique challenges for the Lamenters given their severely reduced numbers. Traditional Blood Angels doctrine called for the formation of dedicated death companies composed of battle brothers who had succumbed to the Black Rage, channeling their berserker fury into suicidal assaults against enemy positions. The Lamenters' limited strength made this approach impractical, as they could not afford to lose even a single battle brother to the Rage without significantly impacting their overall combat effectiveness. Instead, the chapter developed modified protocols that emphasized prevention and containment of Black Rage episodes, while still accommodating the reality of their genetic heritage. Battle brothers showing early signs of the Rage received immediate attention from the chapter's chaplains and apothecaries, who employed a combination of psychological conditioning and pharmacological intervention to delay or prevent complete surrender to the condition. When prevention proved impossible, affected warriors were assigned to high-risk missions where their enhanced aggression could be channeled productively while minimizing the danger they posed to their battle brothers. The chapter's sanguinary priests had developed specialized techniques for managing Black Rage episodes in the field, using a combination of neural dampening fields and targeted pharmaceutical compounds to maintain some degree of control over affected battle brothers during combat operations. These interventions were not always successful, but they allowed the chapter to extract tactical value from warriors who would otherwise be lost to uncontrolled fury. The moral implications of these practices weighed heavily on the chapter's leadership, who recognized the fine line between tactical necessity and exploitation of their battle brothers' suffering. The Lamenters' approach to the Red Thirst differed significantly from other Blood Angels' successors, reflecting both their genetic modifications and their unique cultural development. Where other chapters might struggle with vampiric cravings for blood, the Lamenters' version of the thirst manifested as an overwhelming compulsion towards self-sacrifice and martyrdom. Battle brothers affected by this condition would seek out increasingly dangerous assignments and volunteer for missions with minimal survival probability, driven by a genetic need to prove their worth through ultimate sacrifice. The chapter's chaplains had learned to recognize the early signs of Red Thirst manifestation and developed counseling techniques designed to channel these impulses into productive military service. Rather than attempting to suppress the condition entirely, they worked to direct affected battle brothers toward missions that served the chapter's goals while satisfying their genetic compulsions. This approach required careful psychological management and constant monitoring to prevent warriors from taking unnecessary risks that would endanger their squad mates or compromise mission objectives. The tactical formations developed during the Lamenters' campaigns of atonement reflected their need to maximize combat effectiveness while operating with severely reduced numbers. The traditional Space Marine Company structure had proven too rigid for their circumstances, leading to the development of more flexible organizational patterns that could adapt to changing battlefield conditions and casualty rates. These formations emphasized cross-training and redundancy, ensuring that the loss of key personnel would not cripple entire units' operational capability. The Lamenters' signature formation was the Sorrow Guard, a mixed arms unit that combined elements from different companies and specialties into a cohesive fighting force. These formations typically included tactical Marines for core firepower, assault specialists for mobility and shock action, Devastator teams for heavy weapons support, and technical specialists to maintain equipment and provide specialized capabilities. The Sorrow Guard's composition could be adjusted based on mission requirements and available personnel, allowing the chapter to field effective combat units regardless of their current strength levels. The chapter's vehicle crews had developed innovative tactics for maximizing the effectiveness of their limited armored assets, often employing single tanks or transports in roles that would normally require entire squadrons. Rhino transports were modified with additional armor and weapon systems to serve as mobile command posts and fire support platforms, while the few remaining battle tanks received extensive upgrades that enhanced their survivability and battlefield longevity. These modifications reflected the chapter's understanding that every piece of equipment was irreplaceable and had to be preserved for as long as possible. The Lamenters' air support doctrine emphasized versatility and survivability over specialized performance, with their few remaining aircraft configured for multiple mission types rather than dedicated roles. Thunderhawk gunships received modifications that allowed them to serve as troop transports, close air support platforms, and orbital insertion vehicles depending on mission requirements. The pilots who flew these precious aircraft were among the chapter's most experienced warriors, their skills honed through years of operating in hostile environments with minimal support or backup. The chapter's reconnaissance and intelligence gathering capabilities had been refined through necessity during their penitent crusade, as their reduced numbers made accurate battlefield intelligence essential for mission success. Scout squads received extensive training in stealth operations and information gathering, often operating far behind enemy lines for extended periods while maintaining communication with their parent units. These operations provided crucial intelligence about enemy dispositions and capabilities, while minimizing the chapter's exposure to direct combat casualties. The Lamenters' approach to siege warfare combined traditional Space Marine assault techniques with defensive expertise gained through their experiences at Badab Primaris and other prolonged engagements. The chapter's battle brothers had learned to identify weak points in enemy fortifications, while simultaneously preparing their own positions for extended defense. This dual expertise made them valuable assets in complex urban operations, where the tactical situation could shift rapidly between offensive and defensive phases. The chapter's medical doctrine emphasized rapid treatment and evacuation of wounded battle brothers, recognizing that their limited numbers made every casualty a significant loss. Apothecaries received additional training in field surgery and trauma treatment, while all battle brothers learned basic medical techniques that could stabilize wounded comrades until professional help arrived. The chapter's gene seed recovery protocols were modified to account for battlefield conditions where traditional extraction procedures might be impossible, ensuring that this precious genetic material could be preserved even under the most adverse circumstances. The psychological conditioning programs developed by the chapter's chaplains addressed the unique mental health challenges faced by warriors operating under constant stress and isolation. These programs emphasized mental resilience and emotional stability, while providing frameworks for processing grief and survivor guilt. The techniques proved essential for maintaining unit cohesion and combat effectiveness among battle brothers who had witnessed the systematic destruction of their chapter over decades of continuous warfare. The Lamenters training regimens incorporated lessons learned from every major engagement of their penitent crusade, creating educational programs that prepared battle brothers for the wide variety of threats they might encounter. These programs emphasized adaptability and creative problem-solving, recognizing that the chapter's reduced resources meant that conventional solutions might not always be available. The training scenarios included extensive simulation of combat against various alien species, chaos forces, and renegade Imperial units, ensuring that battle brothers could respond effectively to any threat they might face. The chapter's maintenance and logistics doctrine reflected their understanding that resupply and reinforcement were unlikely to be available during their operations. Battle brothers received extensive training in equipment maintenance and field repair techniques, while Tech Marines developed innovative solutions for extending the operational life of weapons and vehicles. The chapter's supply management emphasized redundancy and conservation, with every piece of equipment carefully tracked and maintained to ensure maximum utility over extended periods. The phenomenon that haunted the Lamenters extended far beyond the genetic curses inherited from their Blood Angels lineage, manifesting as a supernatural pattern of misfortune that seemed to follow the chapter through every campaign and deployment. This malevolent influence operated on multiple levels simultaneously, affecting everything from strategic timing to equipment reliability with a consistency that defied rational explanation. Imperial scholars who studied the chapter's service record identified recurring patterns of catastrophic coincidence that suggested forces beyond mere bad luck were actively working against the sons of Sanguinius. The first documented manifestation of this supernatural curse occurred during the chapter's early campaigns in the 36th millennium, when a routine patrol mission in the Maelstrom region encountered a series of seemingly unrelated equipment failures that nearly resulted in the destruction of an entire company. The strike cruiser Daughter of Tempests suffered simultaneous failures in its navigation systems, communications array, and warp drive while investigating reports of pirate activity near the Badab system. These malfunctions stranded the vessel in a region of space where Chaos Raiders operated with impunity, forcing the Lamenters to fight a desperate running battle while their Tech Marines struggled to restore basic ship functions. The technical failures aboard the Daughter of Tempests displayed characteristics that troubled the chapter's machine priests and engineering specialists. The malfunctions occurred in systems that had undergone recent maintenance and showed no signs of wear or damage that could explain their simultaneous breakdown. More disturbing still, the failures seemed to cascade through the ship systems in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage, yet extensive investigations revealed no evidence of external interference or internal treachery. The incident established a pattern that would repeat throughout the chapter's history, critical systems failing at the worst possible moments despite meticulous maintenance and preparation. The curse's influence on timing became apparent during the Lamenters' participation in the Badab War, where their forces consistently arrived at critical locations either too early or too late to achieve optimal tactical outcomes. During the defense of the mining world of Sagan, the chapter's reinforcements translated from warp space 3 days behind schedule due to unexpected warp storms that affected no other vessels in the region. This delay allowed Red Scorpion's forces to establish orbital superiority and begin systematic bombardment of the planet's defensive installations, transforming what should have been a coordinated defense into a desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. The pattern of mistimed arrivals plagued the Lamenters throughout their service, with warp translations frequently depositing their forces in situations where they faced maximum disadvantage. Supply convoys would arrive after critical shortages had already compromised defensive positions, while reinforcement fleets would emerge from the warp to find battles already decided and their intervention meaningless. These temporal dislocations occurred with such regularity that the chapter's navigators began incorporating additional safety margins into their calculations, Yet even these precautions proved insufficient to overcome the supernatural forces affecting their journeys. Equipment failures among the Lamenters displayed characteristics that went beyond normal mechanical breakdown or battle damage, manifesting as systemic malfunctions that seemed to target the most critical moments of any engagement. Power armor systems would experience sudden energy drain during crucial combat phases, leaving battle brothers vulnerable to enemy fire at precisely the moments when their protection was most needed. Weapon systems would jam or misfire during key tactical situations, while communication equipment would suffer interference that isolated units from their command structure during critical decision points. The chapter's tech marines documented thousands of these incidents throughout their service record, creating detailed analyses that revealed patterns of failure that defied conventional understanding of Imperial technology. Machine spirits that had served faithfully for centuries would suddenly become unresponsive or actively hostile, requiring extensive rituals of appeasement and mechanical intervention to restore basic functionality. The failures showed no correlation with maintenance schedules, usage patterns, or environmental conditions, suggesting influences that operated outside the normal parameters of technological reliability. Brother Techmarine Valerius spent decades studying these phenomena, conducting exhaustive examinations of failed equipment and comparing failure patterns across different weapon types and vehicle classes. His research revealed that the malfunctions often occurred in ways that seemed specifically designed to maximize tactical disadvantage, with critical systems failing at moments when their loss would have the greatest negative impact on mission success. Vox casters would cease functioning just as enemy reinforcements arrived, while Auspex arrays would malfunction during reconnaissance operations in hostile territory. The curse's influence extended to the chapter's interactions with other Imperial forces, creating situations where miscommunication and misunderstanding led to tactical disasters that could have been easily avoided under normal circumstances. Orders from higher command would arrive garbled or delayed, leading to coordination failures that left Lamenters units exposed to enemy counterattacks. Intelligence reports would contain critical errors that sent the chapter's forces into ambushes or diverted them from objectives where their intervention could have prevented catastrophic losses among allied units. During the Corinthian Crusade, these communication breakdowns reached levels that bordered on the supernatural, with entire battle plans becoming corrupted during transmission through standard Imperial communication networks. The Lamenters would receive orders directing them to assault heavily fortified positions without artillery support, while their requests for reinforcement would be delayed or misdirected until the tactical situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. These failures occurred despite the use of multiple redundant communication systems and extensive verification protocols designed to prevent exactly such problems. The chapter's medical facilities experienced their own manifestations of the curse, with critical equipment failing during life-saving procedures and pharmaceutical supplies becoming contaminated or losing potency at crucial moments. Apothecary Malachar documented numerous instances where surgical equipment would malfunction during gene seed extraction procedures, threatening the loss of precious genetic material from fallen battle brothers. Medical scanners would provide false readings during critical diagnoses, while life support systems would experience power fluctuations that endangered wounded warriors during recovery periods. The supernatural nature of these medical failures became apparent through their timing and specificity, occurring almost exclusively during procedures that could determine whether battle brothers lived or died. Routine medical examinations would proceed without incident, while emergency surgery would be plagued by equipment malfunctions that forced apothecaries to rely on more primitive techniques and equipment. The curse seemed to specifically target situations where its influence could cause maximum suffering and loss of life among the chapter's already depleted ranks. Environmental hazards posed another manifestation of the curse's influence, with natural disasters and atmospheric anomalies occurring with suspicious frequency during Lamenters operations. Seismic activity would intensify during planetary assaults, creating unstable terrain that favored defending forces over the attacking space marines. Atmospheric storms would develop suddenly during aerial operations, grounding aircraft and disrupting orbital support at critical moments. These phenomena occurred across multiple worlds with different geological and meteorological characteristics, suggesting influences that transcended natural environmental patterns. The curse's effect on weather patterns became particularly pronounced during the chapter's campaigns against Orc forces, where sudden atmospheric disturbances would disrupt planned operations and force tactical modifications that played to enemy strengths. Dust storms would arise during precision bombing runs, obscuring targets and forcing pilots to abort missions that could have eliminated key enemy installations. Electromagnetic anomalies would interfere with targeting systems during artillery bombardments, reducing the effectiveness of supporting fire and allowing enemy forces to maintain defensive positions. Supply chain disruptions represented another vector through which the curse manifested its influence, with critical resources becoming unavailable or contaminated at moments when they were most desperately needed. Ammunition shipments would arrive with defective propellant that caused weapon malfunctions during combat operations. Food supplies would spoil despite proper storage procedures, forcing battle brothers to operate on reduced rations during extended campaigns. Medical supplies would degrade or become contaminated, limiting the chapter's ability to treat wounded warriors and maintain combat effectiveness. The supernatural nature of these supply failures became evident through their selective targeting of the most critical resources during the most desperate situations. Basic supplies would remain unaffected, while specialized equipment essential to specific missions would be rendered unusable through mysterious contamination or degradation. The curse seemed to possess an almost intelligent understanding of the chapter's operational requirements, striking at precisely those resources whose loss would cause maximum tactical disadvantage. The psychological impact of the curse extended beyond its practical effects on equipment and supplies, creating an atmosphere of fatalism and dread that permeated every aspect of the chapter's operations. Battle brothers began to expect disaster at every turn, their natural space marine confidence eroded by decades of experiencing supernatural misfortune that defied their training and preparation. This psychological burden manifested in increased incidents of the Black Rage and Red Thirst, as the constant stress of operating under cursed conditions triggered the genetic instabilities inherited from their Sanguinian heritage. The chapter's chaplains worked tirelessly to maintain morale and spiritual discipline among warriors who had witnessed too many inexplicable disasters to maintain faith in conventional notions of luck or chance. Their sermons emphasized acceptance of suffering as a test of faith, while providing frameworks for understanding their cursed existence as part of the Emperor's divine plan. These spiritual interventions proved essential for preventing complete psychological collapse among battle brothers who had endured decades of supernatural persecution. The curse's influence on recruitment and training created additional challenges for the chapter's long-term survival, with potential aspirants dying in freak accidents or training incidents that occurred with statistically impossible frequency. Promising candidates would suffer fatal injuries during routine physical conditioning, while others would experience psychological breakdowns that rendered them unsuitable for gene seed implantation. These losses occurred despite the implementation of additional safety protocols and medical monitoring designed to prevent such tragedies. The pattern of recruitment failures became so pronounced that the chapter's leadership began to suspect active supernatural interference in their selection processes. Medical examinations would reveal hidden genetic flaws in candidates who had passed all preliminary screenings, while psychological evaluations would uncover instabilities that should have been detected during initial assessments. The curse seemed determined to prevent the chapter from rebuilding its strength through normal recruitment channels, forcing them to rely on their dwindling numbers without hope of meaningful reinforcement. The influence of the curse on the chapter's relationships with other imperial forces created diplomatic and tactical complications that further isolated the Lamenters from potential allies and support. Miscommunications would arise during joint operations, leading to friendly fire incidents and coordination failures that damaged the chapter's reputation among other Space Marine chapters. Supply requests would be misrouted or delayed, creating shortages that forced the Lamenters to operate with substandard equipment, while other units received priority allocation of resources. These relationship difficulties were compounded by the chapter's growing reputation as cursed and unlucky, leading many Imperial commanders to view their participation in operations as an omen of disaster. This perception created a self-reinforcing cycle, where the Lamenters were assigned to increasingly desperate missions that other forces were reluctant to undertake, further exposing them to the supernatural influences that seemed to follow their every move. The isolation and mistrust generated by their cursed reputation made it even more difficult for the chapter to overcome the practical effects of their supernatural persecution. The Battle Brothers themselves developed various coping mechanisms and superstitious practices designed to ward off the worst effects of their curse, though these efforts provided limited protection against forces that operated beyond the realm of normal understanding. Ritual weapon maintenance became an obsession among the chapter's warriors, who believed that perfect mechanical preparation might overcome the supernatural tendency toward equipment failure. Prayer and meditation increased in frequency and intensity as Battle Brothers sought spiritual protection against influences that seemed to target them specifically. The chapter's acceptance of their cursed fate evolved into a form of stoic resignation that allowed them to continue functioning despite the constant expectation of disaster and misfortune. Battle Brothers learned to plan for multiple contingencies and equipment failures, developing tactical flexibility that could accommodate the inevitable breakdowns and disasters that accompanied their operations. This adaptive capability became one of their greatest strengths, allowing them to achieve mission success despite facing obstacles that would have crippled less experienced or determined forces. The supernatural persecution that defined the Lamenters' existence created a unique form of heroism, born from the knowledge that their efforts would likely end in tragedy and loss. Their continued service to the Imperium, despite the certainty of cursed outcomes, demonstrated a level of dedication and nobility that transcended normal concepts of duty and honor. The Battle Brothers fought not because they expected victory or recognition, but because their genetic heritage and spiritual convictions demanded service regardless of the personal cost or probability of success. The manifestation of heroism within the Lamenters transcended the conventional understanding of Space Marine valor, emerging from circumstances that would have broken lesser warriors and transformed into something approaching the divine through sheer persistence in the face of inevitable doom. The chapter's leadership structure, decimated repeatedly throughout their cursed existence, produced individuals whose sacrifices became legendary not for their tactical brilliance or martial prowess alone, but for their willingness to embrace certain death in service to ideals that seemed increasingly distant from their daily reality. Chapter Master Malachim Foros embodied this tragic nobility more completely than any other figure in the chapter's history, his leadership spanning the darkest decades of their penitent crusade, while bearing witness to the systematic destruction of everything he had sworn to protect. Foros had risen through the ranks during the Badab War, his tactical acumen and unwavering loyalty earning recognition, even as the chapter's alliance with Luft Huron led them toward damnation. The young captain who had argued passionately for supporting the Astral Claw's rebellion evolved into a chapter master, whose every decision carried the weight of previous failures, and the knowledge that his choices would likely lead to further tragedy. The burden of command during the Lamenters' century of penance transformed Foros into something approaching a living saint among his Battle Brothers, though he bore this veneration with the same stoic acceptance that characterized his approach to their cursed fate. His leadership style emphasized collective sacrifice over individual glory, recognizing that every Battle Brother under his command represented an irreplaceable asset whose loss diminished not only their immediate combat effectiveness, but their long-term prospects for survival. Foros developed an almost supernatural ability to identify which missions required the chapter master's personal involvement and which could be delegated to subordinates, though this calculus inevitably involved accepting that some operations would cost the lives of warriors he had known for decades. During the siege of Hive Tertius on Ikar IV, Foros demonstrated the kind of leadership that defined the Lamenters' approach to impossible situations. Surrounded by tyrannid bioforms that adapted to every tactical innovation, while his forces dwindled with each passing hour, the chapter master maintained perfect tactical coordination between scattered units through a combination of personal example and strategic positioning that kept him visible to battle brothers across the entire defensive perimeter. His decision to remain in the most exposed command position throughout the 18-hour final battle allowed him to direct fire support and coordinate evacuation procedures while accepting the near certainty of death that such exposure entailed. The chapter master's survival of that engagement came at a cost that exemplified the Lamenter's cursed nature, while Foros lived to lead the surviving handful of battle brothers away from Ikar IV. The price of his survival was the death of Captain Davian Thule and dozens of other veterans whose gene seed could not be recovered from the alien-infested battlefield. This pattern of pyrrhic survival repeated throughout Foros' tenure as chapter master, with each tactical success purchased through losses that brought the chapter closer to extinction, while demonstrating their unwavering commitment to protecting Imperial citizens regardless of the personal cost. The chaplains of the Lamenters bore unique responsibilities within the chapter's structure, serving not only as spiritual guides and keepers of traditions, but as chroniclers of a penitent journey that seemed destined to end in extinction rather than redemption. These warrior priests understood that their role extended beyond the conventional duties of Space Marine chaplains, encompassing the preservation of memory and meaning in the face of systematic destruction. Their sermons and rituals had evolved to address the specific psychological challenges faced by warriors operating under supernatural persecution, while maintaining the spiritual disciplines necessary for effective combat performance. Chaplain Thaddeus emerged as the most significant figure among these spiritual guardians, his service spanning the entire duration of the penitent crusade, while bearing witness to the gradual erosion of everything the chapter had once represented. Thaddeus had begun his service as a young chaplain during the Badab War, his initial assignments involving the spiritual preparation of battle brothers for what they believed would be righteous combat against imperial bureaucracy. The revelation of Huron's corruption and the subsequent tribunal proceedings forced the chaplain to confront fundamental questions about the nature of loyalty and the relationship between duty and conscience that would define his ministry throughout the decades that followed. The chaplain's approach to maintaining morale among the surviving Lamenters required constant adaptation to circumstances that challenged every conventional framework for understanding Space Marine service. Traditional litanies of victory and conquest became meaningless when applied to warriors whose every success came at the cost of irreplaceable losses, forcing Thaddeus to develop new spiritual practices that emphasized endurance and sacrifice over triumph and glory. His modified ceremonies incorporated elements of mourning and remembrance that acknowledged the reality of their situation, while providing psychological anchors for battle brothers struggling with survivor guilt and existential despair. Thaddeus's role as chronicler of the chapter's penitent journey involved maintaining detailed records of every engagement, casualty, and act of heroism that occurred during their century of atonement. These chronicles served multiple purposes beyond simple historical documentation, providing frameworks for understanding their cursed existence while preserving the memory of fallen battle brothers whose sacrifices might otherwise be forgotten in the chaos of constant warfare. The chaplain's meticulous attention to detail ensured that every act of heroism, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, received proper recognition and spiritual context within the chapter's evolving traditions. The spiritual burden carried by Thaddeus manifested in his physical appearance as the decades of service accumulated, his face bearing the lines and scars of a warrior who had witnessed too much suffering, while maintaining faith in purposes that seemed increasingly distant from daily reality. His voice, once strong and commanding during the chapter's early campaigns, developed a quality of quiet intensity that reflected years of delivering funeral rites for battle brothers, whose gene seed could not be recovered, and whose death served no apparent strategic purpose beyond demonstrating their continued loyalty to an Imperium that viewed them with suspicion and mistrust. The company captains who served under Phoros during the Penitent Crusade represented the tactical and spiritual backbone of the chapter's resistance to extinction, their leadership providing the immediate direction and personal example that kept individual units functioning despite the overwhelming pressures of their circumstances. These officers understood that their role extended beyond conventional military command, encompassing the preservation of morale and unit cohesion among warriors who had witnessed the systematic destruction of their chapter, while being denied the opportunity to recruit replacements or rebuild their strength through conventional means. Captain Davian Thule commanded the chapter's 2nd Company throughout the most brutal phases of their penitent service, his tactical expertise and personal courage earning him recognition as one of the finest Space Marine officers of his generation, despite serving in a chapter whose cursed reputation overshadowed individual achievements. Thule's approach to leadership emphasized leading from the front while maintaining the tactical flexibility necessary to adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions, a combination that proved essential during operations where conventional Space Marine advantages were negated by enemy numbers or environmental hazards. The captain's final stand during the defense of Hive Tertius exemplified the kind of heroic sacrifice that defined Lamenters' leadership throughout their darkest period. Surrounded by tyrannid bioforms that had adapted to counter every weapon system and tactical approach employed by the defending Imperial forces, Thule chose to lead a desperate counterattack that bought precious time for civilian evacuations, while accepting the certainty of death that such an assault entailed. His decision to charge directly into the heart of the alien swarm with nothing more than a power sword and bolt pistol represented the ultimate expression of Space Marine valor, though his sacrifice was witnessed by only a handful of battle brothers who survived to carry word of his heroism back to the chapter. Captain Erasmus Tycho of the 4th Company demonstrated similar dedication during the urban warfare phases of the Corinthian Crusade. His leadership of house-to-house fighting in the Orc city of Scarjack Primaris, requiring constant tactical innovation and personal risk-taking that gradually eroded his company's strength while achieving objectives that other Imperial forces had deemed impossible. Tycho's willingness to accept responsibility for the most dangerous missions reflected his understanding that the Lamenters' cursed reputation meant they would be assigned to operations where failure was expected, and success would be attributed to luck rather than skill. The captain's death during the assault on the primary communication center represented both tactical necessity and personal redemption. His decision to manually detonate the facility's power core, eliminating a crucial enemy asset while accepting the certainty of his own destruction. The explosion that claimed Tycho's life also eliminated the Orcs' ability to coordinate their citywide defense, contributing directly to the eventual Imperial victory, while demonstrating the kind of ultimate sacrifice that had become synonymous with Lamenters' leadership. His final Vox transmission, a simple acknowledgement of orders received and mission parameters understood, became part of the chapter's liturgical traditions as an example of duty fulfilled regardless of personal cost. The phenomenon of the unknown battle brother emerged organically from the Lamenters' service record as a way of acknowledging the countless acts of heroism performed by warriors whose names were lost in the chaos of battle, or whose sacrifices occurred far from witnesses who could properly record their deeds. This symbolic figure represented every battle brother who died manning a gun position during the final moments of a doomed defense, every warrior who volunteered for reconnaissance missions with minimal survival probability, and every space marine who chose to remain behind during evacuations to ensure that wounded comrades or civilian refugees could escape to safety. The unknown battle brother became a focal point for memorial services and spiritual observances within the chapter, providing a way to honor sacrifice that transcended individual identity while acknowledging the reality that many acts of heroism would never receive proper recognition or documentation. Chaplain Thaddeus incorporated references to this symbolic figure into his modified liturgies, using the concept to help battle brothers understand that their individual contributions to the chapter's mission retained meaning and value regardless of whether they received formal acknowledgement or historical preservation. The tradition of the unknown battle brother reflected the Lamenters' understanding that their cursed nature meant that conventional forms of recognition and remembrance might not be available to warriors who served in their ranks. Imperial authorities viewed the chapter with suspicion that extended to their individual members, making it unlikely that Lamenters' battle brothers would receive the same posthumous honors accorded to warriors from more prestigious chapters. The symbolic unknown battle brother provided an internal framework for maintaining pride and purpose among warriors who understood that their service would likely be forgotten by the broader Imperium, regardless of their personal sacrifices or tactical achievements. The veneration of unnamed heroes within the chapter's traditions served practical as well as spiritual purposes, providing examples of proper conduct and dedication that could inspire battle brothers facing similar circumstances. The stories associated with the unknown battle brother emphasized themes of duty fulfilled without expectation of reward, sacrifice made for the benefit of others rather than personal glory, and loyalty maintained despite the absence of recognition or support from higher authority. These narratives became essential elements of the chapter's cultural transmission, ensuring that new battle brothers understood the standards expected of them, while providing frameworks for interpreting their own experiences within the context of the chapter's larger mission. The posthumous veneration accorded to fallen company captains and other senior officers reflected the chapter's need to maintain institutional memory and tactical continuity despite the constant attrition of experienced leadership. The battle brothers who survived these officers' final stands carried responsibility for preserving not only the details of their sacrifices, but the tactical lessons and leadership principles that had made their service effective. This process of memorialization served to transform individual deaths into collective wisdom, ensuring that the experience gained through decades of cursed service would not be lost with the warriors who had accumulated it. The chapter's approach to honoring fallen leaders emphasized their tactical innovations and leadership techniques, rather than focusing solely on the circumstances of their deaths, recognizing that practical knowledge represented their most valuable legacy to surviving battle brothers. The modified combat doctrines developed by officers like Thule and Tycho became part of the chapter's institutional knowledge, their tactical insights preserved through training exercises and operational procedures that continued to influence Lamenters' operations long after their creators had fallen in battle. The spiritual dimension of leadership within the chapter extended beyond formal command structures to encompass the informal influence exercised by veteran battle brothers, whose experience and wisdom provided guidance to younger warriors struggling with the psychological pressures of their cursed existence. These unofficial mentors often carried greater influence than their formal rank might suggest, their credibility derived from years of survival under impossible conditions rather than appointment to specific positions within the chapter hierarchy. The mentorship relationships that developed among the surviving Lamenters reflected their understanding that psychological resilience and tactical expertise could not be maintained through formal training programs alone, requiring personal connections and shared experience that transcended conventional military relationships. Veteran battle brothers accepted responsibility for guiding newer members of the chapter through the unique challenges of serving in a cursed unit, providing practical advice about managing equipment failures and psychological support for dealing with the constant expectation of disaster and loss. The complex web of relationships that define the Lamenters' place within the broader imperial military structure reflected both their noble heritage as sons of Sanguinius and the taint of their participation in the Badab War. Their bonds with other Blood Angels' successor chapters remained strained throughout their penitent crusade, as their brother chapters struggled to reconcile the Lamenters' proven loyalty to the Emperor with their documented rebellion against imperial authority. The Angels in Carmine and Angels Sanguine maintained formal diplomatic relations with the penitent chapter, but their interactions carried an undercurrent of suspicion and disappointment that poisoned what should have been fraternal bonds forged through shared genetic heritage. The Blood Angels themselves adopted a position of distant acknowledgement toward their wayward successors, neither openly condemning nor embracing the Lamenters during their century of atonement. Chapter Master Dante's official communications with the Lamenters maintained the courtesies expected between Sanguinian bloodlines, while carefully avoiding any statements that could be interpreted as endorsement of their past actions or confidence in their redemption. This careful neutrality reflected the Blood Angels, understanding that their own reputation could be damaged by too close an association with a chapter whose loyalty remained under scrutiny by the Inquisition. The Flesh Terrors, perhaps uniquely among the Blood Angels' successors, showed a degree of sympathy for the Lamenters' plight that stemmed from their own struggles with imperial acceptance and their reputation for excessive violence. Chapter Master Gabriel Seth had personally witnessed the destructive effects of genetic curses and imperial suspicion, making him more understanding of the circumstances that had led the Lamenters into rebellion and subsequent punishment. However, even this sympathy remained largely unexpressed in official communications, as the Flesh Terrors could not risk their own standing by openly supporting a chapter still serving a penitent sentence. The Angels Vermilion maintained the most hostile stance toward their cursed cousins, their own secretive nature and careful cultivation of imperial favor, making them reluctant to acknowledge any connection to a chapter whose actions had brought shame upon the Sanguinian bloodline. Their representatives consistently voted against proposals to reduce the Lamenters' sentence or provide material support during their crusade, arguing that mercy toward proven rebels would undermine the authority of imperial justice and encourage similar defiance among other chapters. This hostility created lasting tensions within the broader Blood Angels family that persisted long after the Lamenters' formal rehabilitation. The ongoing conflict with the Red Corsairs created the most bitter and personal antagonism in the Lamenters' complex web of relationships, as they found themselves repeatedly facing former allies who had embraced the very corruption they had narrowly avoided. The renegade Space Marines who had once served alongside them in the Maelstrom Warders now bore the marks of chaos corruption, their power armor displaying the 8-pointed star and other blasphemous symbols that marked their allegiance to the ruinous powers. These encounters forced the Lamenters to confront the path they might have followed had they remained loyal to Luft Huron during his transformation into a Chaos Lord. The tactical knowledge that Red Corsairs possessed regarding Lamenters, combat doctrines, and equipment specifications made these engagements particularly challenging, as the renegades could anticipate and counter many of the chapter's standard tactical approaches. Former Astral Claws officers who had participated in joint training exercises during the early phases of the Badab War retained detailed knowledge of Lamenters' organizational structures and preferred operational methods, allowing them to design ambushes and assault plans that exploited known weaknesses in the chapter's defensive arrangements. Captain Armenius Valthex, a former Astral Claws company commander who had become a Red Corsairs warband leader, demonstrated this intimate knowledge during a series of raids against Imperial shipping in the Gothic sector. His forces consistently targeted convoy routes and supply depots that the Lamenters were assigned to protect, using their knowledge of Space Marine patrol patterns and response protocols to avoid direct confrontation while maximizing damage to Imperial assets. The psychological impact of these encounters weighed heavily on Lamenters veterans, who remembered Valthex as a trusted ally during their service in the Maelstrom Warders. The corruption evident among their former brothers in arms served as a constant reminder of the fate the Lamenters had avoided through their eventual recognition of Huron's true nature. The physical mutations and demonic enhancements displayed by Red Corsair's warriors provided visceral evidence of the spiritual degradation that accompanied service to chaos, reinforcing the chapter's commitment to their penitent path despite its hardships and limitations. These encounters strengthened the resolve of battle brothers who might otherwise have questioned the wisdom of their continued loyalty to an Imperium that viewed them with suspicion and mistrust. The Inquisition's relationship with the Lamenters remained complex and multifaceted throughout their penitent crusade, with different ordos and individual inquisitors adopting varying approaches to monitoring and evaluating the chapter's progress toward redemption. The Ordo Hereticus maintained the most intensive surveillance, their agents embedded within Imperial Guard units and naval vessels that operated alongside the Cursed Space Marines. These operatives submitted regular reports documenting the chapter's adherence to their penitent obligations, while watching for signs of renewed rebellion or corruption that might justify more severe punishment. Inquisitor Lord Militant Cyrus Aurelius, who had presided over the original tribunal that sentenced the chapter to their crusade, continued to take personal interest in their progress throughout the century of penance. His periodic inspections of the Mater Lacrimarum and interviews with surviving battle brothers provided opportunities to assess their spiritual condition and commitment to redemption, though these encounters remained formal and distant due to the institutional barriers between the Inquisition and Space Marine chapters. Aurelius's reports consistently noted the Lamenters' tactical competence and dedication to protecting Imperial civilians while maintaining reservations about their long-term reliability. The Ordo Xenos developed a more pragmatic relationship with the chapter based on their extensive experience fighting alien threats during the Penitent Crusade, recognizing that the Lamenters' hard-won expertise in combating Tyranids and other Xeno species represented valuable assets that should be preserved and utilized. Inquisitor Kripman's xenobiological studies incorporated detailed observations of Tyranid behavior patterns documented by Lamenters survivors of the Icar IV campaign, their first-hand accounts providing insights into bioform adaptation mechanisms that proved crucial for developing counter-strategies against future Hive fleet incursions. The relationship between the Lamenters and Ordo Malleus remained more limited due to the chapter's minimal exposure to demonic threats during their penitent service, though several inquisitors specializing in chaos corruption maintained interest in the chapter as a case study of successful resistance to spiritual degradation. Their analysis focused on understanding how the Lamenters had avoided the corruption that claimed their former allies in the Red Corsairs, seeking to identify factors that might predict which Space Marine chapters could resist chaos influence under similar circumstances. Individual inquisitors developed personal relationships with the chapter that reflected their own philosophical approaches to imperial justice and the nature of redemption through service. Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Hereticus adopted a stance of cautious approval toward the Lamenters' progress, her reports emphasizing their consistent adherence to imperial doctrine and their willingness to accept casualties in defense of civilian populations. This support proved valuable in countering more hostile assessments from other inquisitors who viewed the chapter's continued existence as an unacceptable risk to imperial security. The complex network of relationships that surrounded the Lamenters reflected the broader tensions within imperial society between the demands of military effectiveness and the requirements of political orthodoxy, with different organizations and individuals balancing these competing priorities according to their own institutional cultures and personal philosophies. The chapter's continued service, despite their cursed reputation, demonstrated that even the most tainted servants of the Emperor could find redemption through sacrifice and dedication, though the price of such redemption remained steep and its ultimate success uncertain. The completion of their penitent crusade found the Lamenters reduced to a mere shadow of their former strength, yet their survival represented something approaching a miracle within the grim darkness of the 41st millennium's close. The Battle Brothers, who had endured a century of atonement aboard the Mater Lacrimarum, emerged from their trials fundamentally changed, their yellow and black armor bearing the accumulated scars of countless engagements, while their gene seed carried the precious genetic legacy of nearly 1,000 fallen warriors. Chapter Master Malachim Pharos, now bearing wounds that would never fully heal and a face marked by decades of impossible decisions, received the Inquisition's formal declaration of redemption with the same stoic acceptance that had characterized his leadership throughout their darkest years. The restoration of the chapter's full privileges came with conditions that reflected the Imperium's continued wariness toward warriors who had once rebelled against imperial authority. The Lamenters were permitted to resume recruitment operations and rebuild their strength, but their activities would remain under enhanced scrutiny for an additional century to ensure their loyalty had been genuinely restored rather than merely demonstrated under duress. This extended probation period meant that every aspect of their reconstruction would be monitored and evaluated by inquisitorial observers who possessed the authority to revoke their rehabilitation if any signs of renewed defiance emerged. The process of rebuilding began with the painstaking restoration of essential facilities within the fortress monastery, as Techmarine Valerius and his few remaining technical specialists worked to repair systems that had been neglected for decades. The recruitment chambers required complete overhaul to meet current Adeptus Mechanica standards, while the gene seed laboratories needed extensive upgrades to accommodate the advanced preservation techniques developed during the chapter's exile. These renovations proceeded slowly due to their limited manpower and the need to maintain operational readiness should emergency deployment orders arrive. The first recruitment trials conducted since the Badab War drew thousands of aspirants from the Death World's scattered settlements, young warriors eager to join the legendary Space Marines despite their cursed reputation. The selection process proved more rigorous than traditional protocols demanded, as the chapter's leadership understood that their reduced numbers made every recruitment decision crucial to their long-term survival. Apothecary Malachar personally oversaw each stage of genetic compatibility testing, his decades of experience with the chapter's modified gene seed allowing him to identify candidates most likely to successfully complete the transformation process. The psychological screening procedures implemented during recruitment incorporated lessons learned from the Penitent Crusade, with Chaplain Thaddeus developing assessment techniques designed to identify aspirants capable of maintaining mental stability under the extreme stress that characterized Lamenter's service. The evaluations emphasized resilience and adaptability over pure aggression, recognizing that the chapter's future would likely involve continued exposure to impossible situations where tactical flexibility and emotional control proved more valuable than raw combat prowess. The gene seed implantation procedures required modification to account for subtle changes that had occurred in the chapter's genetic structure during their century of trials, with the accumulated stress of their cursed existence having triggered minor evolutionary adaptations within their Sanguinian heritage. These modifications appeared to enhance the Battle Brothers' resistance to psychological trauma while slightly increasing their susceptibility to the melancholic episodes that had always characterized the chapter's temperament. Malachar's research suggested these changes represented beneficial adaptations that could improve the chapter's long-term survival prospects, though their full implications would only become apparent over subsequent generations. The training regimens developed for new recruits incorporated tactical doctrines refined through decades of desperate fighting, emphasizing the defensive expertise and urban warfare skills that had proven essential during the Penitent Crusade. The chapter's few surviving veterans served as instructors for these programs, their hard-won experience providing invaluable insights into combat techniques that could maximize effectiveness while minimizing casualties. The training scenarios included extensive preparation for equipment failures and communication breakdowns, acknowledging the reality that the chapter's cursed nature would likely continue to manifest through supernatural interference with their operations. The gradual expansion of the chapter's strength proceeded at a carefully measured pace, with each new battle brother representing a significant investment of resources and genetic material that could not be risked through hasty or inadequate preparation. The first new companies to be formed maintained the traditional organization outlined in the Codex Astartes, while incorporating the tactical innovations developed during their exile, creating hybrid formations that combined standard Space Marine doctrine with specialized techniques adapted to their unique circumstances. The integration of new recruits with surviving veterans created complex dynamics within the rebuilding chapter, as battle brothers who had never known defeat attempted to understand the experiences of warriors who had witnessed the systematic destruction of their entire organization. The veterans' accounts of their cursed service provided essential context for understanding the chapter's current situation, though these stories also carried psychological weight that required careful management to prevent despair from overwhelming the optimism necessary for successful reconstruction. The restoration of the chapter's fleet assets proceeded more slowly than their personnel recovery, as the Imperium's shipbuilding capacity remained stretched thin across countless theaters of war. The Mater Lacrimarum continued to serve as their primary vessel, while negotiations proceeded for the allocation of additional ships that could support expanded operations. The ancient strike cruiser had become so closely associated with the chapter's identity that many battle brothers viewed it as irreplaceable despite its limitations and the painful memories associated with its corridors. The development of new heraldry and ceremonial traditions reflected the chapter's need to acknowledge their penitent past while establishing foundations for their future service. The bleeding heart symbol remained central to their iconography, but it was now accompanied by additional elements that represented their redemption through sacrifice and their commitment to protecting Imperial citizens regardless of personal cost. The modified color schemes incorporated subtle variations that distinguished different companies, while maintaining the distinctive yellow and black pattern that had become synonymous with their cursed reputation. The chapter's relationships with other Imperial organizations began to evolve as evidence of their genuine rehabilitation, accumulated through successful mission completions, and demonstrated loyalty under challenging circumstances. Several Imperial Guard regiments that had served alongside the Lamenters during their penitent crusade provided testimonials supporting their restoration, their commanders emphasizing the Space Marines' tactical competence and unwavering dedication to civilian protection. These endorsements proved valuable in countering lingering suspicions from organizations that remained skeptical about the wisdom of trusting former rebels with full chapter privileges. The integration of Primaris Space Marine technology and equipment represented one of the most significant challenges facing the rebuilding chapter, as the new gene seed and equipment specifications required extensive adaptation to accommodate their existing organizational structures and tactical doctrines. The Primaris reinforcements provided by the unnumbered suns brought fresh strength to the chapter, while introducing new capabilities that enhanced their combat effectiveness across multiple operational parameters. However, the integration process also highlighted the differences between traditional Astartes and their Primaris cousins, creating tensions that required careful management to maintain unit cohesion. The Primaris Marines assigned to the Lamenters brought their own perspectives on Space Marine service that had been shaped by different experiences and training programs, their understanding of duty and honor reflecting the more recent developments in Imperial military doctrine. These warriors had not lived through the shame of rebellion and the grinding desperation of penitent service, making it challenging for them to fully comprehend the psychological scars carried by their traditional battle brothers. The chapter's leadership worked to bridge these cultural gaps through joint training exercises and shared ceremonial observances that emphasized common values and objectives. The tactical advantages provided by Primaris equipment and vehicles proved significant in enhancing the chapter's operational capabilities, with repulsor tanks and Redemptor dreadnoughts providing firepower and mobility options that had been unavailable during their century of punishment. The integration of these assets required extensive retraining for existing personnel, while providing opportunities to develop new tactical approaches that could maximize the effectiveness of mixed formations, combining traditional and Primaris elements. The chapter's participation in the Indomitus Crusade provided opportunities to demonstrate their renewed loyalty and tactical competence on a galactic stage, with their forces contributing to several major campaigns against Chaos and Xenos threats across the galaxy's eastern regions. These deployments allowed the Lamenters to serve alongside other Space Marine chapters under circumstances that emphasized martial prowess over political history, gradually rebuilding their reputation within the broader Astartes community through demonstrated performance rather than diplomatic negotiation. The encounters with Chaos forces during the Indomitus Crusade carried special significance for the Lamenters, as they faced enemies that represented the path they had avoided through their eventual recognition of Huron's corruption. The Battle Brothers' performance against traitor Space Marines and Demon engines demonstrated their complete rejection of the ruinous powers, while proving that their loyalty to the Emperor remained absolute despite their past mistakes. These engagements provided psychological closure for veterans who had struggled with guilt over their participation in the Badab War, while establishing precedents for the chapter's future service. The ongoing threat posed by Hive Fleet Leviathan and other Tyrannid incursions drew particular attention from Imperial strategists who recognized the value of the Lamenters' hard-won expertise in combating bioform adaptations and swarm tactics. The chapter's survivors from the Ikar IV campaign possessed irreplaceable knowledge about Tyrannid behavior patterns and evolutionary mechanisms that proved crucial for developing effective counter-strategies against the alien threat. This specialized expertise helped establish the chapter's value to the broader Imperial war effort while providing justification for continued investment in their reconstruction. The establishment of successor relationships with newly founded chapters created opportunities for the Lamenters to share their accumulated wisdom while contributing to the expansion of Imperial military capabilities. These mentorship roles allowed veteran Battle Brothers to pass on tactical knowledge and spiritual insights gained through their unique experiences, while helping to establish the chapter's reputation as reliable allies and competent warriors. The relationships formed through these programs provided valuable networks of support and cooperation that enhanced the chapter's strategic position within the Imperium's military hierarchy. The preservation of their penitent traditions within the chapter's evolving culture reflected their understanding that the lessons learned during their century of atonement remained relevant to their future service. The modified liturgies and ceremonial observances developed during their exile continued to play important roles in maintaining spiritual discipline and unit cohesion, their emphasis on sacrifice and redemption providing frameworks for understanding their place within the Emperor's grand design. These traditions served as reminders of the costs of rebellion, while celebrating the possibility of redemption through faithful service. The chapter's approach to recruitment and training incorporated safeguards designed to prevent the ideological drift that had contributed to their participation in the Badab War, with enhanced emphasis on loyalty to the Emperor and skepticism toward charismatic leaders who might seek to exploit Space Marine independence for personal gain. The educational programs developed for new Battle Brothers included extensive study of the chapter's history and the circumstances that had led to their downfall, ensuring that future generations would understand the importance of maintaining absolute fidelity to Imperial authority regardless of personal relationships or tactical considerations. The gradual restoration of their strength and capabilities proceeded against the backdrop of an Imperium facing unprecedented threats from multiple directions, with the opening of the Great Rift and the return of the Primarchs creating strategic challenges that required every available resource to address effectively. The Lamenters' participation in these galaxy-spanning conflicts provided opportunities to prove their worth while contributing to humanity's survival during its darkest hour since the Horus Heresy. The chapter's legacy within Imperial military history had been permanently shaped by their century of penitent service, their reputation as cursed but noble warriors becoming part of the broader mythology that surrounded Space Marine service. The stories of their sacrificial heroism during impossible situations inspired other Imperial forces while serving as cautionary tales about the consequences of divided loyalty and the importance of maintaining absolute faith in the Emperor's will. As the 42nd millennium dawned with its promise of renewed conflict and unprecedented challenges, the Lamenters stood ready to face whatever trials awaited them with the same stoic determination that had carried them through their darkest years. Their yellow and black armor would continue to appear on battlefields across the galaxy, a symbol of hope that even the most cursed servants of the Emperor could find redemption through faithful service and ultimate sacrifice. The chapter's survival represented proof that nobility and honor could endure even the worst circumstances, their continued existence serving as testament to the power of unwavering loyalty and the possibility of redemption through blood and sorrow. The eternal vigil that defined their service would continue for as long as the Imperium faced threats that required the intervention of the Emperor's finest warriors, their curse transformed from a burden into a source of strength that enabled them to serve where others might falter. In the grim darkness of the far future, the Lamenters would remain eternal guardians of humanity's hope, their tears shed not in despair, but in recognition of the sacred duty that bound them to protect the innocent regardless of the personal cost or probability of success.